What does it look like on the phone? Can you see now? It's better. Sam, welcome to talk.
greet you with Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I think some people here were getting worried that the entire lecture was going to be in Arabic. Well, oh no, I haven't brushed up on my Arabic, so no worry. It's a pleasure to be here in, it is Cornwall, right? This is part of Cornwall, is it Devon? It's Devon. So close yet so far. I was hoping to meet some of the indigenous population of the British Isles, the Brythonic peoples, otherwise known as the Cornish, the Welsh obviously, in Wales. But anyone here speak Cornish? No Cornish speakers? No indigenous? No? Alright. Anyone know any Cornish speakers, perhaps? Oh, okay, I have to go further west then, isn't it? It's still in Devon. So, it's only famous for its cream, right, and dairy farms, right? Yeah, alright, there you go. So, I'd like to say thank you to the Islamic Society for inviting me, Mr. Union, and so on, for you all for your attendance and kind of your attentive ear for a subject which many people really, amongst Muslims, really don't ask themselves. Many people throughout this world are born into different societies and cultures, and they generally don't ask very basic questions, such as all those things that my parents and society are telling me. How do we know it's true? How do we know it's correct? Maybe there might be some mistakes. Maybe it started out, this particular viewpoint that I'm following, as mistaken opinion. So how am I able now to discern what is true and what is false if I don't ask questions? And this is something that happened to me growing up, and a lot of these kind of presentations kind of follow my own history, my own kind of life, asking questions, basic questions from when I was small, and I really haven't stopped since. I just ask more questions. It's like you spend hours and hours climbing a mountain, getting to the summit, expecting to see a plateau where you can finally say you conquered it, and as I get to there, I discover it's not a plateau, it's a ledge, and there's an even bigger mountain behind it. And that's pretty much what the search for truth is. It's an ongoing process. Although, during that process, you will at least map out some things, some parts of reality, and have some sort of understanding of it. Now, there is more questions that can ever be asked about this subject, about the purpose of life, the universe, truth, than can fit into a 45-minute to 1-hour lecture, and I do appreciate that. And I do try to approach things from different angles and different lectures, so I might do a lecture at a different university on a different angle, a different approach to this subject, and I put the video online so that people can then see all these videos and then, let's say, cumulatively see a multifaceted approach. So today's kind of lecture is, I'm going to approach it from an angle of, if something is presented to you as a true understanding of reality, what's it meant to look like? And how do we know what it would look like? Right? If something's going to be presented to you as the truth, an explanation for everything that exists, or at least the bigger picture, the biggest picture, what would it look like? Right? What do we expect it to look like? A question I asked myself prior to encountering Islam, and from my own perspective, Islam seemed to check all the boxes of what I expected to be guidance from mankind, but of course, in that sentence, there's a lot of what we call presuppositions, which I'm going to try to at least answer very quickly and briefly to fit it into this kind of 45-minute to 1-hour lecture. So we'll now work out how to get this. Okay. So, as a Roman senator said to Isa alayhi salam, allegedly in the New Testament, what is truth? Right? How, Pontius Pilate, what is truth? So, that's a very basic question, because we talk about truth, and truth sounds like a very religiously loaded term, so let's kind of come to a very simple understanding of it. I would say that truth simply means what exists, i.e. reality. So basically, things that are real or have existence. Now, people might say, aha, but how do you know what exists? How do you know that you're not maybe living in the Matrix, or you're a brain in the vat being manipulated by aliens for their own amusement and entertainment, perhaps? How do you know that what you're seeing right now is not a dream in a fevered state, perhaps? Well, the thing of all these situations are that they all have reality to them, if they were real, if they were actual, the situation we're in. And what do I mean by that? Is if you are in a fevered state and you're seeing delusions, these delusions don't come out of nowhere. They come out from misfiring neurons. There's a causality to what you're observing. So what you're observing comes from somewhere, i.e. misfiring neurons in your own brain, but it comes from somewhere. If you're in the matrix, well, all those simulated realities that you're observing, they come from somewhere too. And that would be some massive hard drive, perhaps. But they would be coming from somewhere, and would be coming from programmed by some, let's say, machine or what have you, if you were to use the in-universe fiction. But it comes from somewhere. It has a reality to it. Right? You just might not know how to classify that reality because you're not aware that it doesn't represent physical objects in the sense of made of atoms and electrons and protons and so on, but they're actually just electronic signals supplied by binary or what have you. And of course, brain in the vat, same thing. It's the aliens would exist, and the electrical signals would be real signals that would be going into your brain, but you would the unreality is not that it doesn't exist what you're seeing, it's rather that you're unable to classify as whether it is a physical material thing you're observing or it is signals being sent artificially to your brain about the external world. But they would come from somewhere, right? Presumably the aliens would have their own little programming language and operating system, hopefully not Apple, but to send it to you, well, Apple don't do innovation anymore, as you've probably heard recently, so they probably would invent that kind of stuff. But there's reality to all things that you observe. So what you're observing, basic sensation, comes from somewhere, has a reality to it. If you're not in control of what you're observing, then you can deduce in a very Cartesian way, or as Descartes kind of argued, Cavita or some, you can deduce there's an external reality to yourself that you don't control, and therefore reality itself exists, and you are within that reality. You can deduce that very basically, from basic rationality. So when I now use the term truth, when used for human context, it refers to the accuracy of human mental models with external reality. So basically, what you believe is true if it matches an external reality. That is a definition of truth I'd like to kind of proceed on. Now, okay, we have a definition of truth. How do we assess claims of truth? Because everyone's claiming that what they believe is true, or that have some understanding of truth. And I'm not just referring to different religions, by the way. Everyone acts upon beliefs they believe to be true. Even if they are people who say, look, I'm just agnostic, I don't know what religion or what claims true, but I'm searching for it, I'm searching for truth. Well, then that has the belief that truth is knowable, for example. Or you might have agnostics that believe that truth is unknowable, and that's a belief about truth which that person holds to be true. So everyone believes in truths. Right? The question is, or claims rather, for truths. I don't like it when people say, that's your truth, and I follow a different truth. Well, sorry, do you live in a different reality, a different dimension bubble, that there's a different truth for you and a different truth for me? There's no multiple truths, there's only one truth. There's just difference of opinion as to what that truth is. So the sun is round. People believed in history it was a disk, a round disk. Obviously, some eventually believed that it was a sphere. The fact that some people believed it was an upturned bowl of fire, according to one ancient Greek thinker, producing a kind of a round shape. Obviously, that was hot and bright. Does it mean now that there's different truths about the sun? No, it just means there were different opinions about the sun, and we now know that the sun is not those other truth claims. There's only one particular truth claim, which is a bright sphere of plasma or hydrogen, ionized hydrogen. So, what are the kind of criteria we can use to assess truth? Well, does it explain the observable phenomena that we see? So if someone gives you a claim of truth, does it explain what you can observe? If yes, it means it's a possible explanation. It's possible, maybe there are other explanations. If other explanations are possible, then you have to assess which one do you think is more likely, and usually that will be determined by which explanation is the greater explanation. And what I mean by that is, you know, in debates, in public debates, which I've been involved in, victory is determined not by the majority of people you can convince, although some debates do, they kind of vote to see before the debate and after the debate to determine how many people change their minds. But in reality, debates are truly won if one side presents the bigger context, an argument that explains a bigger context than their opponent does. So if they can explain that, well, this situation is due to something greater. So for example, if someone was to say that the reason why we're getting hotter weather year on year is because that's just a cycle of the seasons, and sometimes you're going to have a season that's a bit hotter than other seasons, and so on. Of course, if someone says, well, actually, the greater explanation is that we're having something called global warming, which is actually causing not just a kind of slight heating up of the world, because in many centuries before, you know, the kind of cold winters that you get in England were much colder than they are now. Even prior to global warming, sometimes you get kind of cyclical changes in temperature. You know, so the Mediterranean was colder in the past, then it got hot, then it got colder. You know, ice ages occurred and things like that. But if someone says, no, actually, there's something beyond this because it doesn't explain all the data we have, that in essence the world is getting hotter than it ever has been before, this needs a greater explanation, which is global warming due to human artifice, i.e. human causes. So that person can win the debate because they've presented an explanation that's bigger than the other explanation provided by somebody else. And by bigger, it means it explains the greater context. So is that for me? Okay. It's for you, it's the pizza delivery. Right. So that is how you know, that is how different explanations can be assessed. Which one is more probable to exist, usually which one has a greater explanation. But if there are no other explanations that are possible, then the explanation that remains is definitively the truth. So let's discuss one particular kind of question. Right. What are the observable realities that we can see? Right? What can we see in the universe? What can we see around us? Or we can see, firstly, there are objects, things which are, let's say, tangible or tactile, that we interact with our senses, basically, our five senses. There is more than one of them. We're one of those many objects. Two, that different events happen to different things. So, for example, this planet Earth is a different planet to Jupiter, of course, and a hydrogen atom on Jupiter will have a different, maybe different experience too, and in subject to different gravitational pulls and certain different temperatures than a hydrogen atom in our atmosphere, for example. So different events happen to different things. And the same goes with everything beyond and bigger than a hydrogen atom. And of course, all things are finite and subject to magnitude, limitations, definitions. There is no such thing as something that's infinite in the universe, or at least not that we can observe. And of course, if something was infinite in this universe, then there would be no room for anything else. So the fact that you have multiple things which are finite and limited, kind of at least, and can coexist, means that they don't limit each other out, and therefore they are limited to a degree that allows multiplicity. There's also the existence of change, so things experience beginnings and ends in multiple ways. You have a conglomerate of things coming together, like planets and then stars, and then being destroyed and dispersing. Of course, at the lower end of the spectrum, you have, some people speculate, virtual particles which pop into existence and out of existence. So people said that also a beginning and end. Of course, we theorize that the universe itself had a beginning due to observed expansion by the universe. So things have a beginning and end, or are subject to change, in essence. One could even say that change is just a constant cycle of beginning and ending on different levels, different ways. So as 1 second of the clock begins and another second ends, and things like that. There are different types of objects. There's inanimate matter, so your basic garden variety rock, inanimate matter of course, and then you have something that is animate. Animate, thing, a very interesting English word from the Greek, anima, meaning soul or spirit. It was usually used by the Greeks to refer to something that had an internal force. Anima, something that has an internal force in it, because they divided the universe into substances and spirits, as in substances that are just unmovable, are physical things, and then forces that move the physical things. So the animate matter, so more than just your average change in the universe, something, a type of matter that moves within itself or has motivational force in itself to proactively preserve its existence. A rock won't proactively preserve its existence. A bee, a cat, and of course, hopefully, humans are motivated to preserve their existence. Maybe someone should tell that to certain capitalist moguls who are basically causing climate change. Anyway, animate matter is quite interesting because it has something inside it which is, well, currently unaccountable according to most physicists, which is it has an internal observer, or consciousness, as it's otherwise known, experiencing reality. And it is subject to motivation, and this motivation that it has is connected to two phenomena we know as pain and pleasure. Of course, that's not the only type of animate matter. There's not a special type of animate matter, a subset, you could say, which experiences reality, has consciousness, also has pain and pleasure, but has the ability to form abstract mental models of reality. Intellect, the ability to think abstractly, sometimes called metacognition by psychologists. Something that at least animals don't seem to have, at least the same degree. The ability to form abstract mental models of reality seems to be a uniquely human trait. Of course, animals do have the ability to recollect and have memory and learn, of course, but to form abstract mental models and act upon those mental models and create and adapt new types of approaches other than trial and error, that is very much a distinct human provenance. So, this is basically what we observe. So the realities of life is that it experiences the world. It's not mindlessly reacting to stimuli. Although plants, you could say, mindlessly react to stimuli, and technically they are life as well. But animals don't mindlessly react to stimuli. They experience it as pain and pleasure, rather, and a plant does not experience it as pain and pleasure. And of course, as I've already mentioned, humans have that particular reality, which I'm just reiterating here. But there's also another reality of humans that a comprehensive truth has to explain, which is, it has to explain human history for at least 500,000 years. Some people would argue that the earliest human fossils are even up to 1 million years old, which is quite significant. And it has to explain why there are different human civilizations and religions. And of course, it has to provide some guidance, at the very least, for human nature, or at least some account of human nature. The Enlightenment thinkers like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke and Baruch Spinoza, they weren't just trying to invent a new system, but in order to, before you could do and invent a new system, you have to provide an account of reality. And they would write books on essays concerning human understanding or on human nature. They'd have to write about that first, produce their own model, and then explain how they're going to create a political system based on human nature to facilitate the objectives of human nature that they believe humans have, and produce a system that they believe addresses human nature and at least facilitates its fulfillment. So if you have a truth about reality, it has to also, if it's going to be comprehensive, that is, it has to address these things. So being a physicist or a biologist, or a physicist looking through an electron microscope, or a biologist looking through a microscope at a petri dish, they won't derive necessarily the explanations for human nature, as in how to address it, how to create a political system, an economic system of distributing resources. They will just discuss the little kind of packets that form reality, small composite building blocks of reality. But really, if you're trying to have or present a comprehensive truth, you have to explain all things that exist, including an addressment of human nature, if you believe it's the truth. Of course, if you believe the universe has no purpose and there's no meaning behind the universe, you don't necessarily have to produce a political system to address that, but therefore you could argue there is no greater truth, there's just haphazard human existence as well as you used to listen to all things in the universe. But if you believe that everything is connected and there is a purpose and meaning behind the universe, then humans have to share in that meaning, and it has to have some relation to our nature. So we have to ask these basic questions. What are the different worldviews on offer? So there's a number of apps you can choose from at the App Store. Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, these are major ones. Of course, someone's going to say, oh, what about Jainism? What about Rastafarianism? Or what about Moonies? There are a lot of subsets and so on. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to be discussing these, and I know that there's no one here representing these particular worldviews to give perhaps a fair account of those worldviews. And of course, you could say, being a Muslim, I'm not going to be presumed to be unbiased in the matter. But what I will say, and by the way, that's why I always prefer debates than lectures, because a debate, I like to invite someone from the other side of the discussion to represent their side as best as possible, and this is my personal preference. So if you happen to come from any of these particular other worldviews and you think I have not addressed them, or you think that they offer better arguments than I have portrayed of them, please raise it in the Q&A. I won't just accept questions and answers, I will also invite contention. So you want to contend with me on something, disagree, and I'll also allow you to comment again on my response. So we can have a back and forth, and I will allow that because I actually want people to hear other worldviews advocated by their adherents. So, Hinduism and Buddhism. So let's kind of look into these discussions. I didn't include specifically atheism. I feel that atheism is encompassed, and agnosticism is encompassed in the latter two, which I'll explain as to why I believe that. Of course, I could also add social Darwinism as well and into that view. So let's look at these worldviews. Well, firstly, how do we know the universe? Where did it come from? What created it? How are we going to determine its origin? Now, if any of you have seen me online, I have a whole lecture at Surrey University about last month, just on does God exist, and I answered atheist contention. I went through sequentially every atheist contention, and that took the better part of an hour. So I'm not going to be able to refute every single contention an atheist can mention in this lecture, because we don't have enough time, so you can watch that video. But suffice to say, there are only two possibilities to the, let's say, origin of the universe. Either the universe is uncreated, either it was made by something else, or it was made by something else that's unlike the universe, or unlike it in any way, shape, or form, literally having no form, that would be unlike it. Let's go through the first possibility. If this universe was uncreated and has always existed, in some way, shape, or form, that means that it has no beginning, no start point. That means that if it has no beginning and start point, then how long was the past before this moment? And of course, it would say it has no beginning, always existed, therefore it has an eternal past, right? An infinite past. If that's the case, if to get to this point in this infinite past, you would have to traverse infinity. What that means is if I told you that this lecture, I'm going to give you, the Q&A will come along in about an infinite amount of time, so just wait. Will the Q&A ever come about? Will we ever arrive at the Q&A? Right? No. Why is that? Because you can't traverse infinity. You can't complete it, or get from one point to another in infinity. Infinity, by definition, can't be exhausted, and therefore there can't be any change in infinity, or infinite time, whatever you want to call it. There can't be any change. So the very fact there's change of time, time is literally the rate of change of things, can't exist. The very fact that time exists proves that it had a start point at some point. There was a start point, something. So all right, then maybe it was created, right? But maybe it was created by something else that's like the universe as well. Another universe, let's say. Okay, something else that's finite and limited, all right, fine. Then what made that? Oh, something else that's finite and limited, right? And then something else, and something else, and something else. Again, if you go on forever saying it was made by something else that's just like it, then you get to the problem of an infinite past again. And it's called infinite regress fallacy, and it causes contradictions. And that's how you know something's not true, when it has contradictions within it. So the only other possibility is that the universe was caused by something that is unlike anything in the universe, is not limited, is not finite. Now, someone might say, oh, but what made that? Well, why does anything need to be made? Right? What does making something mean? Right? Like when you're making a sculpture out of, let's say, clay, and you're heating it in the kiln. What you're doing when you're making a sculpture, what are you doing? Anyone? When you're making a sculpture, what are you doing? Sorry? Rearranging particles. Well, okay, you can give a physicist's answer, but what are you doing generally when you're making a sculpture? Shaping it. Yes, you're shaping it, right? You're giving it definition from the Latin definis, meaning finite, as in you're giving it its limits. Right? Because if it doesn't have limits, right, it has no limit. Before you give it limits, it didn't exist. Right? But creating it into existence means you limit it into existence. Right? By defining its shape, by defining its form, by defining its attributes, something that it can't be anything else. Now, usually what I tend to do in some lectures on proof of God is I bring a random rock, a naturally occurring rock, and I say, how do you know the rock is created? And I usually kind of bamboozle the audience for a bit while they wonder, they try to think, well, because I've seen rocks be created on nature program. Yes, that's great, but how do you know that this rock is, in particular, is created? And then some person says, well, maybe it's uncreated rock. But then, okay, that's the case. Why does it have its shape, its form, any attribute to it? At some point, something determined it would have that shape and that form. That's how you know something is created. That's the whole basis behind all rational thinking amongst human beings is, if you see something that has particular attributes, you ask, why does it have those attributes? Which means, what determined it would have those attributes? What gave it the color, shape, density, what have you, right? So, if the creator of the universe, let's say, is infinite, has no limitations, has no shape or form, it doesn't need to be created, because it has no limitations that need to be defined by something else. And therefore, the only conclusion that makes sense with avoiding contradiction and avoiding infinite regress fallacy is that the creator of the universe is not finite and limited. That's the only conclusion that we can come to without any contradictions inside it. Then, of course, the next question is, okay, fine. Maybe I'll concede, the atheist might argue, that the universe was created by an infinite creator, but how do you know that this creator has an intellect or a mind or whatever you want to call it, right? A will? How do you know? Maybe it just mindlessly makes things like some kind of multiversal kind of system. Now, the multiverse system is, or rather an infinite amount of quantum foam and things just pop out of this quantum foam, or quantum sea as it's known, which very much is similar to an ancient Egyptian idea of like the primeval waters, and things just pop out of primeval waters and so on and so forth. So there's nothing new under the sun, as the Old Testament says, right? Or the Tanakh, as the Jews would call it. Now, how do we know that there's not like infinite number of universes? Well, you don't know how many universes there are, so let scientists try to work that one out, if they are able to. But you can know that whatever made this universe did so intentionally, because either there's two possibilities. Either it makes things mindlessly, without intention, or it makes it with intention, deliberately. Let's look at the first option. The creator of the universe makes the universe with no reason to do so, no intention. It does it mindlessly. Where does the motivation to do it come from? Again, they might say there's two possibilities within that. Either it has an internal mechanism, or it's something external to it that's pushing it to make universes, like pressing a button on a factory conveyor belt, and the factory's conveyor belt starts turning, and the robotic machines start working, right? And of course, the causality wouldn't be the factory; it would be whoever's pressing that button. So that then leads to the question as well: who's pressing that button, and then who's pressing their button, and what have you, right? Infinite regress fallacy. Okay, what about an internal mechanism? Maybe this infinite universe production factory has an internal mechanism that makes it automatically, whether it likes to or not, make universes. And the question is, what's making that mechanism make universes? Oh, it's a smaller mechanism. Okay, what's making that mechanism make universes? To give you a picture, there's a clock around here anywhere. Is there a particular clock? No? All right. Well, you have clock, not to check the time, just all right, usually the argument to say that maybe there's an infinite number of internal mechanisms inside this creator of universes. The reason why that doesn't make sense is it's like saying that there's a clock, and the hands on the clock move because there's a smaller clock inside it. And then there's a smaller clock inside that, and there's a smaller clock inside that. Ad infinitum, an infinite amount of smaller and smaller and smaller clocks. Each clock, depending on the smaller clock within it, to move it, you'd reach, again, another infinite regress fallacy. Where does it begin? Where does the first movement of that, to move the big hand, begin? Right? Again, it can't be it that causes contradiction, and it can't be an acceptable answer. This means there's only one possibility that remains, which is whatever made this universe did so because it chose to. And there's no other possibility that avoids contradiction or self-contradiction. And the ability to initiate actions, that's definition of will. So quite simply, it chose to, it has a will. Which means that everything in this universe then, that was created, was intended to be in existence. Everything that happens, all events, all objects that you can see, everything that exists was intended. Your life, everything that happened to you, the exams you're doing, everything that you experience was intended to happen. So, if an infinite creator can basically make things, can create things out of basically from nothing, because it has infinite, it is infinite, it has no limitations that require building materials to make stuff. It has no limitation to itself, so it can make stuff. Then it means that it intends everything that exists, that we can see. So what does that leave? What is basically taken away from this? Well, communism is automatically then reduced because it doesn't believe in the necessity of a God at all. In fact, it denies the necessity of God. All human thinking is the result of, or culture is the result of the means of production, but ultimately it's all based on a dialectical materialism of matter. Everything that you see is not an intention of God or intention of anything, it's just an eternal universe with two different opposing forces clashing with each other, and constantly a new opposing force arising from that, and so on, and producing all differences that we see. And there is no kind of beginning to the universe, there's just basically dialectical materialism. So communism is automatically invalidated from that without even going to its political system and economic system. And of course, atheism is automatically then invalidated from that. You're left with the top kind of worldviews, as well as Islam. So Hinduism, Buddhism, I'm going to go very quickly through this. Is Hinduism, does it offer the possibility of truth? Well, here's an issue. It argues that humans initially were part of the creator, Brahma. And eventually humans kind of separate off, the human souls separate off from the creator, forgot where they came from, and you're in living a life of pain and suffering in a constant cycle until you can reach an enlightenment and reunite yourself with the creator. Now, can I prove or disprove reincarnation empirically? Well, no, I can't. But I can poke holes at the first claim, which is that the creator, which is infinite, unlimited, has smaller pieces which are finite and limited inside himself. I'm going to use the word he just for the sake of denoting will, but not that the creator is a man, because obviously the Creator would transcend reproduction. At least in the Islamic perspective anyway, some worldviews don't believe that the Creator transcends reproduction. But anyway, so Hinduism believes that the Creator was one, and then somehow you can divide infinity, and the product of dividing infinity is finite things, which are basically limited, and they could then somehow, which were they were part of being of infinite knowledge and now are ignorant. These things produce contradictions. A, that you can divide something infinite up into pieces, so that God is made up of smaller pieces, or building blocks. If something's infinite, it doesn't have smaller pieces inside it. Like infinite amount of finite things, it would basically be an infinite amount of limitations, and they wouldn't exist. Right? It wouldn't. So, what the Creator must be infinite with no smaller building blocks, must be fundamental. The Hindu worldview, and now I want to give a caveat. There are a few different schools of thought within Hinduism, and I'm trying to represent maybe the mainstream one. There are multiple ones. Sorry if I've missed out your version. But time is limited. Buddhism is really a subset of Hinduism, although Buddhism posits the unnecessary nature of a belief in a god, but still approaches the idea of pain, suffering, and reincarnation, and the idea of karma. Of course, the question you must always ask is if you do a bad deed and it gives bad karma, you do a good deed and it gives good karma. Firstly, what is defining good and bad, and who's keeping record? That is a problem that I initially found when I first researched in Buddhism when I was around 11 or 12. I've researched a bit more beyond that time, by the way. I didn't just leave it behind when I was 11, 12, of course. But it can't answer that. And of course, the very fact that Buddhism considers the idea of a deity to be unnecessary or not important is also a problem, because if everything that exists was intended, then clearly the Creator God is not a God of deism. The idea that the Creator makes the universe and it doesn't care about it, that is clearly not the case, because everything that existed was determined by Him, right? So it's like me saying, let's just say, someone makes a car, and it's a really nice car. Of course, it's got a nice shape, and it's particularly got seats for passengers. It has everything seems to be towards a function, and then saying to us that the creator of that car doesn't care about cars, doesn't care about transportation, has no connection to it. Right? It doesn't really have. It's completely apathetic to it. The question is, well, if that's the case, and if it is absolutely apathetic, why do they make the car with particular functions it has? That sure it has a purpose for something. If it has no point to doing it, right, that wouldn't make any sense. And of course, the belief, the idea that a God which is a deist God, a God that makes the universe but is uncaring of it, or that we are too small for that God to know or to care about us, also implies that the creator God's attention span is limited. That the creator God just can't, like, you're too small for the creator God to notice, even though the creator God can make the entire universe with intended objects in it to the smallest particles, but somehow its attention span is just limited. That's a contradiction, which is why deism can't be true. Christianity and Judaism. Judaism is a very good contender. Its theology is practically identical to Islam. Christianity also almost identical to Islam, with a few little Greco-Roman additions that appended onto the original Judaism of the teachings of Jesus. I won't go too much into detail, but basically there's a difference between the teachings of Jesus and the latter teachings of Paul, who never met Jesus, but was a Roman citizen. I'm not going to go into much detail. I'm going to give you a hypothesis. You can feel free to reject it, because I don't have enough time to substantiate it. But I believe that Christianity is the result of a type of Judaism based on the idea of the Messiah. Jews can believe in the Messiah, but a type of Judaism that was made appealing to Greco-Roman culture, a kind of culture that believed that gods can become human, that gods can die, that blood can be an atonement, human blood can be an atonement for your sin, and that gods can sacrifice and bloodlet for the atonement of sin, like the Mithras cult, for example. I believe that Christianity is a hybrid of Judaism to fit Greco-Roman culture. That's an assertion, by the way, now. I've made an assertion with no evidence, so I would invite you to study that for yourself. But there is All the differences between Islam and Christianity you can find pre-existing in Greco-Roman culture. All those differences. Right? Islam as theology is virtually identical to Judaism, both being Semitic religions, of course, religions of the Near East, the Middle East, what it's called today, or the Levantine area, for in the case of Judaism. The only difference between Islam and Judaism is Judaism views itself as mostly via giving rules and guidance to a particular, the 12 tribes or clans of the Israelites. And for people who are non-Jews or Gentiles, they were expected to follow Noahide, the 7 Noahide laws. And of course, one of those laws is monotheism. Right? Now, for any of you Muslims who why would you follow those laws, don't worry, just being a Muslim, you automatically follow all the Noahide laws, the laws intended for Gentiles, including eating meat which is not carrion meat, where the blood is in the animal when it died. Is viewed as carrion meat, part of the 7 Noahide laws you're meant to avoid. So eating halal, you avoid that prohibition. But if there is a guidance that's meant to come for humanity or from this creator, it must embrace all of mankind and give detailed rules beyond just the basic 7 rules to all mankind. So while Judaism is a very good contender, it's not as comprehensive as Islam. Islam gives the bigger context. Of course, Islam actually views Judaism as originating in revelation from the Creator. So Islam actually is considered to be the successor to Judaism, not a completely different religion that just popped up and is coincidentally like Judaism. It's meant to be a successor to Judaism, and of course it has to then have similarities, because you're not meant to bring a completely radically different new message if the truth is the same. So there's that. Of course, then there's secular liberalism, the current ideology that we are kind of on today. You think, well, secular liberalism doesn't really tout itself as a religion per se. It's meant to be a political ideology. Well, it started out as a political ideology, but then it morphed into something a bit beyond that when it adopted or tried to explain things to justify its political ideology, and therefore it moved into political morality and the idea of why should you then follow secular liberalism. So let's kind of move on to look at the main then 2 contenders, secular liberalism and Islam. So we have to ask the question, which of these worldviews answer the questions about that I've identified previously, comprehensively, are internally consistent and externally consistent. What that means, externally consistent, is does it actually, is it claims about reality consistent with what you see in reality? And within itself, does it make sense? Does it contradict itself, or is it consistent? What are the beliefs of liberalism reduced down? Well, liberalism and liberal theology, or even liberal atheology, believes a number of things. It could be that there's no actual purpose of the universe, or the purpose of the universe is unknowable. You can't have, from its perspective, toleration of multiple religions if, according to its own logic, you could ascertain for definite certain which religion is correct and which religion isn't correct. And why would you tolerate the ones which are not correct? This was a problem that faced medieval Christian thinkers, which is where liberalism popped out from, and so this is why this understanding was implied, that the purpose of the universe is essentially unknowable or hard to prove. If there is purpose, it is irrelevant to mankind unless it agrees that the purpose of humans is seeking happiness defined as sensual gratification. This comes from good old Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, who tried to produce an empirical understanding of what happiness is, and it wasn't some inner contentment, it was definition of constant sensual gratification. Humans seem to seek sensual gratification, therefore happiness, which is a more constant state, must be the continual gratification of the senses. Right? That's what they said as the definition. Then humans are independent individuals. They don't need anyone else. They are individuals, as in they can be no further divided. Society cannot be divided further than a human being, basically. Indivisible. They are the atoms, atomos from the Greek, meaning not cuttable any further. Humans began in a state of nature, self-sufficient and independent of each other. This is again John Locke's argument, as well as Rousseau and many, many others, who believe that humans began separate, but because they were all as individuals running around, maybe sometimes the bigger humans could oppress the weaker, smaller humans, and so eventually they agreed to enter into a society which is an unnatural form, an unnatural state of nature, but they enter into a social compact, which means that they say, we'll agree to have a government over us that will restrict some of our earlier freedom, but in return give us freedom from being oppressed by other human beings, by other individuals. That was the claim of the early thinkers of liberalism. The next claim, humans own their own bodies and are entitled to the physical property they own outside themselves. Humans are supreme lords over themselves, as Locke said that. Humans have a right to pursue happiness, as defined as sensual gratification, and humans are inviolable to each other without consent, and truth and purpose is dependent on human desires. So what's important is not what is ultimately true, but humans, other than what human desires. So as long as a human being desires something, as long as it doesn't involve violating another human being, then that is considered to be a morally important thing, not what is a truth beyond the human individual. Now, what is the problem with these theories? Some of them seem completely innocuous. What's wrong with these things? Well, firstly, human state of nature never existed in human history. Humans have never been individuals in the sense of existing by themselves. Rousseau was really ridiculous in his argument where he said that humans, a man and a woman would meet in a jungle, let's just say, and they would only spend enough time with each other to procreate, and then they would separate, and then the woman would give birth to a child. Eventually, she would raise the child until the child reaches basic minimal adulthood, and then she would leave the child and go her own separate individual way. Probably that describes a lot of hookup culture today, but it's certainly not human history. Never existed. Humans are actually not absolute self-sufficient individuals. In fact, they are highly dependent on each other. If no one taught you language, you'd never learn it, you'd never develop it. Right? In fact, the big question sociologists don't know how to explain. Where did language come from? If no one teaches you language by the age of 16 to 17, or 15, 16, 17, you'll never learn it, even if they try to teach it to you afterwards. They find kids raised in the wild, beyond a certain age, they will remain feral for the most part. They can't. They won't be able to pick up human language due to, well, go research neuroplasticity anyway on that matter, right? Any psychologists here? Anyone study psychology? You've heard about these concepts? Yep, so not just me claiming it, so you can ask him, of course, research for yourself, as I always recommend. A lot of your by how your parents raised you, the society and culture that you came from. Most of you are wearing very similar clothes to each other because you're basically living in the same, we were raised in the same society, either, in this case, a Western society or a westernized society, and most of your views about the world were determined for you and taken by you uncritically by the society that you were born in. Individual, what about you, it's called the problem of authenticity, by the way. What about you is actually authentic? Authentic to what? Your genetic code, for example? Well, even that was given to you by your parents, actually, right? And because you're students, you know quite a lot about having things given to you by your parents. No offense, I was in your situation too. Humans are completely or mostly dependent on each other. Okay, unless you're a hermit who knows how to survive by themselves, usually because you were taught by that, but when you were young. Apart from that kind of person, living in the wild in some kind of, Rambo First Blood-esque type situation, anyone who knows that film reference, then you know it. If you don't, you can ask me in the Q&A, right? Or ask someone else. Unless you're like that, you're dependent on society to provide you with your clothes, your food, most of what you have, which you think, I'm independent, but you'll need someone to give you shelter, or someone to build that shelter for you, make those kind of clothes. There's nothing really about you that's even authentic, even your fashion sense. That kind of shirt that you were sold, a handbag, those shoes that you were sold to be a representation of you being authentically you is mass-produced by the tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands, right? And will be worn by many, many other people. Now, of course, you might know that if you've ever gone to a party and someone has been matchy with you, so, oh, damn it, this person's all in the same dress, I have to go home and change it. So what really about you is authentically you, right? It's meaningless. But liberalism came with the idea of individuals and so on. Happiness, constant sense of gratification. You only need look no further than looking at celebrities who attained a lot of wealth and fame at a young age. Many of them go into depression and lack of purpose. They feel that there's no purpose to their lives once they've achieved what they were told was the summit of achievement, was the where happiness resided. And they realize that, well, wait a second, okay, now I've got enough food to fill my belly, I've got a massive house and mansion, I've got cars, and I've got fame and attention. What else is there for me? And they'll usually go on artificial stimulants. They'll usually take artificial called drugs, let's just say, in order to kind of supplement their existence because they still feel something empty, they feel something lacking amongst themselves. Sensual gratification doesn't seem to be the be-all end-all of human existence. It's part of it, but not the be-all end-all of it. As for the idea that humans own their own bodies, well, here's the thing. While practically speaking, of course, I think most of us will believe in legal systems that where consent is an element, obviously, that goes without saying. But I'm talking philosophically here. How do you own your own body? Did you make yourself? Did you buy yourself from the one that made you? Right? What about you why do you own your physical body that you never created in the first place, you never determined to exist in the first place? You have a point?
Because I can do whatever I want with that one.
Okay. The gentleman said, because I can do what I want with that body. Well, I can get a hire car, and for the duration of owning a hire or using a hire car, I can drive it in a demolition derby if I want to. But the problem is that eventually I'll have to face consequences of misusing someone else's property, even though, or I could steal a car and go joyriding and do whatever I want with that car prior to the police catching up with me. It doesn't mean now I own it, the car. So philosophically, you don't own yourself, and supreme laws over yourself. Well, there seems to be greater laws than you, such as physics, right? And of course, limited lifespan, all these things, your own motivations, your need for sustenance. There's many things which are greater than you that seem to have a hold over you that you can't escape from. There's no true freedom, absolute freedom in this absolute understanding and sense. The right to pursue happiness, essential gratification. Here's a problem with this, right? And I'll kind of get to that, which is if you believe your purpose in life is to pursue sensual gratification, where did you get that understanding from? Who told you the purpose of your life is to pursue sensual gratification? Now, some people use this to deny God's existence. They'll say, I'm a liberal, and I believe in God. You can believe in God and while being liberal. That just proves that human mental compartmentalization is possible, as long as you don't realize there's a disconnect or dissonance between the two. Okay, but then they realize that they suffer, and human beings suffer, and you don't get everything you want, and people die, and people actually die young, and people actually go through horrific illnesses and pain, and there's great injustice in the world where humans do bad things to each other and get away with it. And then they say, well, seeking pleasure, if God created us to seek pleasure, and we're not seeking pleasure, and we're not attaining it, and most of our lives are suffering and trial and tribulation, then God doesn't exist. I say, wait, hold your horses. Who told you your purpose was to seek pleasure? Unlimited, unremitting, absolute pleasure. No. That is an assumption. An assumption taught you when you're young, mostly. Especially in everything that permeated your existence. And the very fact that when you cried for treats for your parents thought maybe, as I'm taught, the best way to look after your kids is to give them what they want, whenever they want, which makes the kids self-entitled. Toy commercials, picture happiness as having the latest toy, or the latest computer game, what have you, and then kids become more and more self-entitled for each new generation since their old Christian pasts in Western society. It doesn't seem to be, this is taught. Now when they come of age and they realize that the world is a place of difficulty, they start questioning God's existence. And wait a second, you've been lied to, but it's not the idea of God. You've been lied to in the idea that you think that your purpose of life is unremitting pleasure. Pleasure and pain, they both exist. the first thought that should come to your head is, the creator of the universe intended both to exist, and they must both be part of my purpose. Experiencing pain and experiencing pleasure. Right? That's what you should have thought about rationally. But most people don't ask themselves that question. Instead, they deny God's existence, based on an assumption they had concocted by themselves or by those who taught it to themselves. The idea that truth and purpose is dependent on human desires, well, that's obviously ridiculous. No matter how much I want to be a billionaire, and I really desire it, I'm not going to be a billionaire, right? And maybe I'll make my own cryptocurrency to make that happen, but the currency will not have any value anyway, unless I can convince other people of my delusion, and that's the base of money. That's what the base of my rate comes from. Okay, the last and finally, the idea that government must be by consent, that government of over individuals must be by their consent. I think I wouldn't necessarily have any problem with that per se, but I would argue that in practice that is not manifested in secular liberal societies. You might think, you're right, I have actually given my consent to the government to take taxes from me, and none of you will ask by the government, hey, can we take some taxes from you and deliver services? No one ever said to you, I give you an offer that say, look, you can be a citizen or you can just be a permanent resident. And if you're a permanent resident, you won't benefit from the services that we provide, but you can live here, right? Some libertarians actually want that in America. Right? They want that option. Yeah? You're not given that option. Well, just in case you know, actually you have given your consent. And you've given your consent in a way that you don't realize, but you might regret, which is you voted for a leader. Why do the politicians of any party want you to vote? Why are they so desperate for you to vote? Right? Even if it's going to be for their opponent. It's because voting represents you giving your consent to the system. John Locke said it. This is not me arguing this, I'm making it up. And Thomas Hobbes said it. Your participation in voting, whoever you vote for, means you consent to the system, allows the system to tax you. That's why the American founding fathers, they were angry at England not giving representatives in the House of Parliament for American colonialists, representing American colonialists who were obviously British at the time. They said no taxation without representation. Right? They demanded it. That was one of their arguments. Why? Because representation means you can be taxed. You give consent to be taxed. And of course, once they take your vote, they can do whatever they want. Obviously within certain limits, but they can do whatever you want. So I always tell people that, certainly around election time, the politicians, they don't want your opinion, they just want your vote. It's not referendum. And by the way, before you say, oh, wasn't Brexit a referendum? No, Brexit was really an opinion poll. What made it legally binding was the MPs voting to make it binding. Yeah, it's just, but prior to that, it was just had no legal weight beyond simple opinion poll. Right? That's how the system works. And so of course, government may restrict actions of individuals. The government may take away your freedoms, but the only caveat is that as long as it's universal, so as long as it applies to everybody, right? So this is what John Locke argued, right? That liberty is not the ability to do whatever you want. It's as long as you're under rules which are universal to everybody and known, and not arbitrary. As in, someone walking down the street, the leader says, I don't like you, I don't like your face, you're guilty, I'm going to punish you. Rather, John Locke said that as long as the rules are known to everybody, no matter what they are, within the area of the law that is not prohibited, you're free. And that's what he meant by freedom. Of course, there are certain problems with this. You know, what do they say? There's a little joke about it. Democracy is two wolves and a sheep having a vote as to what to have for dinner. Right? In theory, let's say, a government could say, right, everyone, as part of the meals which are going to guarantee everyone must eat, everyone has to eat pork, let's just say. And the majority might agree, and it becomes a universal law for everybody, and they say, there's no discrimination here, because we all have to follow that law. So wait a second, Jews and vegans and vegetarians and Muslims might have a disagreement over that. But as long as it's universal, they argue, it's fair. And you might think, that's a bit extreme example. Where does that exist? Well, let's say in France, where the hijab ban and the niqab ban in public, they say it applies to everybody. Applies to everyone. Of course, they had a particular target in mind when they made those laws and those rules. And of course, what's even more ironic and hypocritical is that they made exceptions for people going to masked balls where you have to wear masks for the parties. Oh, that's an exception though. Yeah, so, and not so universal. I guess I suppose the question is we should ask, what is the point of freedom, as well as what do we mean by freedom? Because you're not actually free to do whatever you want. And what do you mean by free? The ancient Greeks believed that eudaimonia, the definition of happiness, was merely to attain contentment within oneself, being virtuous and also being philosophers. So thinking about the world, that's how you attain happiness. Eudaimonia actually literally means divinely blessed, as in this person has eudaimonia, they've been blessed by the gods. Eudaimonia, right? That's why it has the daimon in it, meaning a god or spirit. Hobbes reinterpreted happiness as sensual gratification, and you'll see that John Locke argued that people should be free to pursue life, liberty, and material things. Of course, the American Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, you could say, redacted that instead of material things, just put happiness. They changed the term material things to happiness. But if you go to America, you'll see they're now synonymous terms, happiness and material, and the pursuit of material things, which was John Locke's original formulation. What about the World Happiness Report? Right, the top happiest countries it reports are mostly Scandinavian. However, at the same time, at the same time, those who use the greatest amount of antidepressants, one of them being the United States at the bottom there, but also Scandinavian countries, Iceland, 5 up Denmark, Finland, they're at the top use of antidepressants in the world. Other actual polls where they actually measured, they looked at not happiness defined as access to healthcare and GDP. They actually asked people questions: when was the last time you laughed? When was the last time you felt okay or you were hopeful? When they asked more specific questions, they actually came up to a different response. A different report by different people, but they got a different response. And this was that South America actually got the highest rankings. Paraguay, Colombia, sorry, the fonts do not come on this computer. Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, and so on and so forth. And some of these places are completely, crime-ridden places, and yet the reports, the Gallup surveys report a completely different view. When you ask people happiness based on how they feel, you get a different result. So clearly, liberalism doesn't actually seem to be working. It is defined as making people content or happy. That's how you define things. Of course, there are other problems, such as internal contradictions or inconsistencies. So Locke believed that liberty was to be free from arbitrary will of other human beings, and yet there are so many laws which you can fall foul of for things that are not your fault, or specifically your fault, or you didn't intend. So strict liability offences. So if you basically go out and have intimacy with someone who they told you they were 16 years old. In England, obviously, the age of consent is 16, or if you're in the United States, in many states, it's 18. So if you're in America, let's say, and you went out with someone who's 17, but you thought they were 18, and they told you they were 18, and they showed you in a fake ID that they were 18, you will still be prosecuted for that, despite your best attempt to follow the law in the United States. Sexual harassment, public disorder, and harassment, these are all defined by causing offense, not by intention, by the way. So sexual harassment can also be defined as creating a sexually offensive environment. And then you will fall foul of those laws. That depends on whether the person considers you to be sexually offensive. Causing serious offensive communications, that's also a thing. So Azhar Ahmed was a Muslim guy who basically talked about the British Army and said that they should go to hell for what happened in the Iraq War. He posted on Facebook, and then he got prosecuted successfully, unrepealed, due to sending serious offense, right? These are not new laws, by the way. Everyone says, why are we losing our freedoms? Look, these are old laws being applied on you, by the way, yeah? Of course, the Crown Prosecution Service is at discretion to prosecute or not prosecute. So what many governments like to do is they like to make the law very broad and ambiguous. and then prosecute who they want, who've crossed over the boundaries of the law, and so on. Which is why I think it was Rowan Atkinson claimed that he had protection from a lot of these laws because he was known and famous, and no one prosecuted him for it. But if you're on the wrong side of those laws and you're from a particular minority that's not in vogue at the moment, you can fall foul of these laws being arbitrarily applied upon you and not applied on anybody else. Of course, things like you have the right to property unless you get divorced. Many cases, one particular case I know of was a man found his wife cheating. His wife initiated divorce proceedings, and the judge awarded to her the very house that he owned and gave it to her, and basically she continued her affair with that lover in the very house of the man that she cheated on. And that is deemed to be fair in secular liberal societies. You're allowed to imbibe alcohol, but you can't give consent to intimacy when obviously you're drunk. However, if you do other criminal actions when you're drunk, you can be prosecuted even though you're drunk. So, can you give consent or can you not give consent? Right? But they don't know how to reconcile that because they can't ban alcohol, even though it's a drug. And of course, the question is also, why are drugs banned? Is not drugs taken by the consent of the adult, right? Consent of the adult, and yet they have to ban it because they see it has social consequences, it has certain problems that develop. These are contradictions within the legal system provided by the values which I previously mentioned with you that liberalism discussed. Dealing with human nature doesn't deal with human nature. And of course, there's also deceiving someone into intimacy that can be grounds for rape prosecution. But one of those deceptions are wearing a disguise. Where if you wear a disguise and the person consents to have intimacy with you, and then they realize that you're not, I don't know, you're not that particular person. Let's just say you're not David Hasselhoff, but you were just pretending to be. I don't know if David Hasselhoff is attractive or not, but you can be done for rape. Of course, then the judges were asked on this matter, but what about women who wear makeup and look very different to what they ordinarily do? And what about people who lie about their wealth as well? And they said, okay, you know what, we won't prosecute that. Well, that's a very arbitrary distinction because that would still be deceiving someone, no? So, is that not consent? Is it consent? Like, where are you setting the boundaries here? Right? Contradictory and arbitrary. So, of course, there's also social intolerance. I call it the liberal haram police, for those who know that term. People that say, that's wrong, you're wrong for doing this. How dare you judge other people's lifestyles? Reason being is because the definition of good and bad is not necessarily whether something is intrinsically good or bad according to the purpose of human beings, but rather it's whether someone wants to do something or not. And as long as it's viewed as not in violating someone else's body or property without their consent, that's the measure of good and bad. Now, if you then believe that something is bad, and you say, well, yeah, but you might, just because you want to do it doesn't mean it's good, let's just say, they'll say, how dare you now judge that person? Or you're being intolerant by saying that what they're doing is wrong when liberal morality has deemed it to be halal, has deemed it to be permissible, right? So they'll view you as being intolerant. Of course, you say, but am I not allowed my right to express my speech, express my opinions about something? And they'll say, well, no, not when it's intolerant. So we shall be tolerant. We should be tolerant except of the intolerant, or intolerance will not be tolerated. Right? Those kind of convictions. It's a problem which cannot be reconciled in secular societies. They don't know what to be tolerant or intolerant over. Libertarians have their own perspective. Of course, they will say be tolerant over anyone, even if they do discriminate and do bad things and are racist and so on and so forth. But that, obviously, they would say that they're the most consistent. I disagree. I think there must be lines of limitations, but there must be consistent ones. And liberalism, or non-libertarian liberalism, has not been able to solve those problems. Of course, liberalism and exploitation. There's so many things you can do to other people without physically harming them against their will. You can represent them in the media. You can force feed them social expectations that make them feel they have to kind of be part of or to conform to a particular idea or set of social customs and so on. Some of these, if you think about them, are actually quite barbaric if you were to really contemplate, right? You know how they say female genital mutilation is as a horrific thing? I agree, it's horrific. You know, the mutilation of one's body, when it's certainly of little kids and so on and so forth. When it comes to clitorectomies and things like that. When it comes to clitorectomies, right? This is what they mean by FGM. However, there's so many things that you can mutilate yourself, and it's not deemed to be mutilation by Western society, as long as it's done by consent, yeah? Which is a person can be made to feel that they're so imperfect they have to inject collagen into their lips, right? Or get breast implants, or body waxing, or wear high heels. High heels are not comfortable. You know, people say, why you wear a hijab? That's not comfortable. They say in their high heels as they walk around. You know, that's one of the things. Oh, that's allowed. I mean, I've seen women have the back of their feet cut. Some women even wear plasters on the back of their feet to avoid, or to cover up a previous cut, or to avoid being cut further. Right? It's not pleasant, and yet it's deemed to be acceptable. Women feel that they have to conform to certain standards. It's usually airbrushed images that are not even representative of human beings. And of course, the Barbie doll is not even anatomically human, not in correct proportion. Right? And that's how women are measuring themselves up to. You can oppress people without physically compelling them to do something, just by creating social expectation on them, create need. And when people say, we're all individuals, we can all make responsible decisions, we are in control of ourselves. Okay, well tell us people who are tobacco addicts, the people who have tried to diet, but they keep failing at dieting because tasty food is just so overwhelmingly in their face every day that they can't avoid having high sugar, high fat foods. I mean, McDonald's business model basically was successful based on the principle of exploiting human desire. Yeah? They say humans should be free to pursue their desires. Yeah, but other humans are free to manipulate your desires. If you make yourself a slave to your own desires, whatever they might be, then whoever can control your desires, you're a slave to them. So, ultimately, liberalism has no explanation for pain and suffering. Liberalism has no motivation for inconvenient morality with no world of reward. How can you convince someone who's a psychopath, let's just say, psychopath doesn't necessarily mean someone who's homicidal, it just means they don't empathize, they can't empathize with anyone, to follow a certain principle or code of morality when it's no longer convenient to their life. If the purpose of your life is pleasure, is happiness, quote unquote, and other human being is in the way of your pleasure, is in the way of your happiness, what's to stop you from sacrificing them to get what you want, even if it's criminality, basically, right? Creating motivation amongst people is very hard. Communists had a big problem with this. Part of communist theory was that humans were naturally desirous of justice, and they would naturally sacrifice themselves individually for a greater good. They realized that they couldn't motivate their citizens to do that without profit incentive and all such things, and so they invented gulags and summary execution instead, to provide an incentive for people to do the right thing, quote unquote. So I would argue that, as I've already said, you can't make random mercurial desires the basis of your happiness, but rather you have an intellect and you have the ability to train yourself, you have the ability to train your desires, and it works so much better in a society whereby people don't have unlimited ability to manipulate and hack into your desires by creating advertisements, and by creating social pressure and peer group pressure for you to conform to certain behaviors and activities that basically are profitable for them and exploitative of you. Oh, and just so you know, when some people say that, for example, there's debate amongst liberals concerning sexual objectification of women and, say, sex work like prostitution and images of pornography and other images which exploit the woman's body. So that you have, amongst liberals, you have two schools of thought arising because they disagree with each other. They don't know how to resolve this issue. One is the sex negative and one is the sex positive. Right? So the sex positive says if the woman wants to be a prostitute and it's her choice, she should do so as long as it's by consent, right? And if they want to show their image on public in pornography and on magazines, they should be allowed to do so if they're by consent. As long as by consent, that's fine. Sex positive. But of course, then the sex negative, quote unquote, whatever you want to call them, liberals would say, no, this is exploitation of women. You're creating an environment that pressurizes more women to basically conform to these kind of tropes, these kinds of images, and to present themselves sexually in order to kind of compete with other women who are doing so to get sexual partners and social recognition. Because you've made a woman's attractiveness part of her social status. And humans are social creatures. Right? You want to seek social status. You want to be respected. Why? Because if you're not respected, then you're alone with no one to help you. So if you make people's image connect to their social status, they think, I have to look attractive, otherwise I'll be alone. I will be forgotten. Because humans, as Aristotle said, are social animals. Now, this is not just me making this criticism of liberalism. Many scholars and professors have done so. I'll make these slides available to you via the Islamic Society afterwards, so you don't have to write down everything. You probably should at the beginning of the lecture, actually. You don't have to write down everything. But anyway, I will just conclude with looking at how Islam guides mankind. So Islam posits an answer to these questions. It says there is a creator to the universe. There is a purpose to the universe. There's a purpose for all things. All things bear witness to God, are created by God. And of course, we have intellect. Humans have intellect. But we are not born with an innate sense of what our nature is. Ants seem to know how to be ants. Bees seem to know how to be bees. The worker bee seems to know exactly what to do to help the hive. Right? The queen bee obviously knows how to be a queen bee, and the soldier ant knows how to be a soldier. They seem to know their own roles. They seem to know what to do. What's our role? I'm not saying be part of a hive, but I'm just saying that, you could take, I was amazed when you could take cats or rabbits or dogs, and even if you raise them outside of the context of all the rabbits, cats, and dogs, they still behave exactly or similar to other members of their species. Right? They have similar reactions to things. Cats like to hunt, and they basically will, as kittens, will naturally just want to learn how to hunt and will play being practice how to hunt. And rabbits have a social hierarchy. Even if you raise them from little bunnies, they encounter other rabbits. When they get older, they try to establish dominance over each other, knowing that that's what you should be doing as a rabbit. So they will try to basically hump each other, not actually hump intimately, but to hump to get dominance, right? Because then the head rabbit eats first when the food comes, and they all seem to know this just intrinsically. So what is our instruction manual? Because the creator of the universe intended us to have desires and nature, and intended us to have intellect, the ability to form intellectual models. If this was intended, then it was intended to receive knowledge. So the question is, how are we going to get this knowledge about human nature? Because the best thinkers have spent centuries trying to think about how they can derive how humans should be guided, how they should live, and what they should live for, just based on observation. But looking at human beings, basically, a biologist is a person that looks at human beings, as physical objects. But you can't derive from biology how human beings should live, what is good and bad, right? Because good and bad depends on purpose. A good car is what? What's a good car? What would you say is a good car?
The one works.
Not necessarily fast, sorry? Works doing what?
The one you can drive. A good car is the one you can drive.
Drive for what purpose?
To go somewhere.
To go somewhere. Sorry? Sorry? It must do its functions, but what its functions for? What functions? For what purpose?
Superior comfort.
Sorry?
Superior comfort.
Superior comfort?
Yeah.
It gets you from A to B. Because superior comfort is not the purpose of it. No one said, let's invent cars because I need something that has superior comfort. Like you can have a bed, you can have a sofa, buy a car, right? A good car is a car that gets you from A to B, fulfills its purpose. A bad car is what then? Sorry? Doesn't get, you can say inferior comfort. It doesn't get you to A to B. Good and bad is only related to a purpose. If you don't know your purpose, you don't have a basis for good and bad. It's quite simple. So then what's the purpose of human beings? It's not intelligible by looking at physical things, because a physicist will just look at you and say, yeah, you're a bunch of atoms. You're a bunch of subatomic particles. That doesn't tell you your purpose. So Islam says that the creator of this universe, who you should be able to rationally and intelligibly understand exists by observation of the universe, which the Quran tells you to do it as well, says that messengers are sent to mankind to guide them, give them a balance to their actions so they may conduct themselves with justice. Justice being defined as what is deserved. And how do you know what is deserved when you're taught what people deserve? Because how do you know what people deserve? Right? Communists have a different idea to liberals as to what people deserve. In terms of everyone should deserve exactly equal resources. Liberals will say, well, no, they should deserve equal legal rights, but not necessarily equal resources. Well, who's going to now arbitrate between these two arguments when they both argue from the basis of equality? Right? How are you going to argue which one's right, which one's wrong? The Quran says that God might knows things which you don't know about yourself, and so might give you things which you think don't suit you, but really is actually good for you, because humans don't know human nature fully. We're still studying it. Right? And the problem with psychological tests, you know what they do? They put humans in laboratory conditions. The question is, what is the natural conditions for humans? Right? What is our natural environment even? Is it savanna? Is it desert? Is it, what is our even natural environment? You can't even answer that question. How are we even going to determine what humans are naturally meant to do just by observation? So Islam believes that the universe was created by an infinite creator, everything was intended, has purpose, and all things bear witness to God and glorify Him by being the opposite of Him. Right? What is pain? Why do we experience pain? Pain teaches you that no matter whatever you want, there are certain things that are outside your control. If everything went your way, you think everyone, you feel that, oh, I have power, because everything goes my way. I'm successful, everything, I'm powerful. It takes a fall for people to realize they don't have control over all things. And also then the Quran says that the creation of the universe is greater than the creation of mankind. Which means that this universe wasn't created just for you, by the way. Islam, why did you presume the whole universe was created just for you? It wasn't created just for you. Everything in this universe is a glorification of God, or a sign of God's power, because it is opposite to Him and exists. If God didn't create things, then isn't that no different to having no ability to create? The creation of this universe, fundamentally, the rocks and the atoms and everything bears witness to God's ability to create, that He has power to create. That's fundamentally the basis and purpose behind all things. And animals and humans, whether they experience happiness, joy, injustice, pain, pleasure, in aspects where you think, maybe young children die, or some people grow old. All these things, pain, pleasure, the entire experience, all of this is a testament to the fact that we are completely opposite to God. And God can create all things and all circumstances and situations. Right? God is not one where He's a cosmic rich king that does things for you because you ask for it. And God creates you to serve. God creates you to serve you. It doesn't make sense. Right? People say, "Oh, my bad things happen. God must be evil." And no, good and bad is part of the creation of this universe. The real question you should ask is God merciful and is He just? Does He show mercy? And all living things that had consciousness, we're told, it's that thing that can't be explained that's inside you, there will be an afterlife that will be recompense for things which were not fair, or you viewed to be not fair. Or if a child died young before having a full life, for example, that child will have a life afterwards without that pain and suffering. But pain and pleasure are part of your finitude. They're part of your finite existence. They're part and parcel of your experience of the universe. And not everything in this universe will experience the same thing. Some people will be successful, some people will be very not successful, some people will die young, some people will live till old age. But ultimately, even if your life is a limited amount of time, even if a child dies at a small, young age, you view it to be an injustice, because that would be injustice amongst humans. As in, someone kills a little kid, that's a murderer, and that's viewed to be, you didn't let that kid live a long life. but you presume that the default setting of human beings is to live a long life. Just existing is a gift from God. Even if you only had 5 seconds. You know, like let's just say you're out with somebody and you spent a nice time, a nice day with them, and they've done everything you wanted, and they've really great hospitality, and they said, look, you know, there's not much time, but they say, look, there's a theme park. Do you want to just see it for 1 minute or 2 minutes, just pass by it? I just want to show you this theme park. And you go in, and you're only there for 2 minutes, you look at it, it's quite nice. You don't have any time to go on the rides. You have no time to go on the rides. And then you get taken out. No, you're going to say, how dare you just take me to the theme park for only 2 minutes? How dare you? I should be going on every single ride. Who says you deserve that? Right? So if something is born in this life, even if it's just a cicada or what have you, a small bug that has a very brief life, the smallest amount of life or existence is itself a gift. You just assumed it was an injustice that it didn't last a longer duration. That was an assumption you made, not what Islam makes. And the Quran says that God is from God comes the good and bad, as the Quran says. What you call good and bad, from God it comes both these things. The good things in your life and the bad things in your life. Right? Not some Manichean idea where they believe there's a good creator and a bad creator. Right? And it wouldn't make any sense anyway, because there'd be 2 infinite things which would then limit each other out. And of course, we made 2, why not 3 or 4? You know, that sort of question. Which why what's this polytheism? It's self-contradictory. Anyway, so there's many verses in the Quran that talk about all observable reality. It talks about all these things, but more importantly, it also talks about society. It compares society to people on a boat. It says that some people are on the top, some people on the bottom. But what if some people on the bottom say, you know what, usually we depend on those on the top to give us water from over the edge of the boat. Instead, let's make a small hole in our part of the boat to get water directly and not trouble those on top. If those on top let them do so, they would all sink. But those on the bottom will prevent them from doing so, they will be saved. The argument is, in Islam, society isn't, as the communists think, just one whole, and there's no individuals. And it's not as liberals think, it's just a bunch of individuals. Society is both individuals and culture, ideas, family institutions. It's a number of conglomerates together. Communism and liberalism, they're 2 extremes. Right? Islam is the middle path on this matter. Individuals have rights, and society has rights. Right? As people say, oh, how comes Islam? Well, one of the things that got me actually almost thinking about, well, basically converting to Islam was when I asked the question, why does Islam say women should wear hijab? Why is it that teaching? I realized obviously later on that it has more than just saying that. Of course, it talks about men having to be also, to kind of wear modest clothing and not wear those kind of, also not wearing body tight clothes and things like that some guys who like to gym like to do, right? Right, to be modest, like why is that? It's because I kept thinking about it, why does Islam say that? Why does Islam say that? Like, why is it, if Islam was made, but if it was made by men, wouldn't they want women to be revealed more, you know? Because that's what Alchemy would love, right? The ability to pick and choose. It's like a catalogue, you know, society then becomes a catalogue, oh, I'll have her and whatever, right? They'd like that. Why is it opposite? Why does it say there's modesty for both men and women? Why is that? And I thought about it for so long until I realized, it seems to me that Islam wants to have public life or social life to be just about social life in terms of, you know, professional work. If I'm going to my job, I want to do my job. I want to face sexual politics. I don't want to face sexual tensions and all these things. Why is that? Yeah. Why have all these conflicts? People start competing with each other over these things. Women, and these are many studies done by psychologists and sociologists, notice that women, when they notice that women around them are dressing more attractively, they all seek to kind of compete because they feel that the attention is being divided up into others and went away from them. Right? Makeup is sold, and they notice makeup and these very other factors simulate women in certain phases of their kind of ovulation and things like that, but they have certain physical appearances and so on and so forth. There's a kind of sexual connection between the makeup and the makeup industry and what it sells, and sexual attractiveness. Sexual attractiveness, well, not aesthetic attractiveness, like, you know, seeing a Van Gogh painting, but sexual attractiveness, right? So Islam removes sexual, like politics from society, removes sexual tension, because society surely should be about being professional, working, learning, studying, working together, building things. Why are you bringing sex into the streets, so to speak? Isn't that a private activity for the houses and homes and so on? Why is it being publicized and so on? And these are the many approaches. Islam says that you can't satisfy human beings by giving them constant resources. Right? This famous narration by the Prophet Muhammad, if the son of Adam, as in all human beings, were given valleys filled with gold, they'd want more valleys filled with gold. And the final quote, nothing fills the belly of Adam's son except dust, means that you won't go on, you won't be satisfied until you're basically dead, in essence. Right? That you'll never be satisfied. You'll go on being unfulfilled until you die, wanting more and more and more. So Islam has these approaches. Good and bad is defined by human purpose. Human purpose is defined by submission to the creator of ourselves. Freedom in Islam is actually freedom from social pressures or desires that go against your ultimate purpose. People trying to exploit you. People trying to hack into your desires. Islam has a political system and laws to govern nature. And the desire of these laws is not one that expects you to be perfect, actually. People think, it's a very austere law system. And I've had many lectures on is Sharia barbaric or misconception of Sharia. I've done those kind of lectures a lot in the past, so check out one of my videos online, because I go a bit more into detail on this. But Islam has a system for human society and how to govern human beings. And it's not one that expects you to be perfect. It's not one where you just make one little mistake, you say the wrong word, and suddenly you're going to be like demonized forever, or you're going to, it's one that expects you to be weak, expects you to make mistakes. There's a narration by the Prophet Muhammad where it's reported that the creator of the universe said that if humans didn't commit sin, if we were sinless, then God would destroy us and create a creation that could sin, and they would seek forgiveness, and He would forgive them. Because you making mistakes, you being imperfect, is part of you as a finite creature. You're expected to. It's not a get-out clause, by the way, I'm going to commit some sin now, but I'm a finite creature. No, you have to be, there's no kind of get-out or jail card for that, for those who do it intentionally. It's when you make mistakes, and you're repentant, you're genuinely repentant, you genuinely don't want to do it again, the God of Islam, the creator of the universe, is one which is merciful. It's not only God of Islam, it's the God of all the monotheistic religions. We don't believe that Allah is a separate God from the God of the Israelites, or Jews, which also is Allah, because it's spelled the same way, both Semitic languages. Allah just means the word for God in the Semitic languages, Arabic being one of them. So, even the punishments you see in Sharia, which are corporal punishments, people say, isn't that barbaric or horrific? You don't understand actually the humanity behind this. What's more barbaric? That you punish someone there and then, send them back home to their parents, their family, parents, whatever, wife, child, or whatever, husband. Or you lock them up in a human zoo in cages for years, in many cases, and they only go back to reoffending away anyway. It doesn't even work as a system. Right? It's about 74% of people who are incarcerated will reoffend within 9 years. It's an inefficient revolving door system, which in the West they haven't been able to find an alternative to. Of course, let's not forget the country in this world that has the highest incarceration rate out of the entire globe, and that's the United States of America, 1 million prisoners. More than China. Beats China. China, of all places. You think, beats them. Yeah. Why should the criminal's family suffer for the actions of a criminal? It's actually humane that punishments are corporal and not ones involving sticking human beings into cages. Because at least the family gets to have that person back and not deprive them for months and months. And I think finally my last point is, if you were to compare liberalism and Islam, and I wrote a lot of text on this because I want you, when you read the slides later on, to have some of these evidences, but I'm just going to summarize it for you. Here is the point of this lecture, which is the idea that the human economic problem, any economics here? Economists here? Want to say economics? Economics? Students? You like a little bit out? All right. Liberalism defines the human economic problem as humans have infinite infinite wants and there's only limited resources. So the whole point of addressing this is to create this maximizing production. There's a problem with this, which is that it means that wealth is not distributed adequately. I'm not saying fairly, because communists would say fair means everyone gets equal wealth. No, no, no. It's not distributed adequately to the point that everyone has adequate resources for their healthcare, their education, and just a living and agreeable life. And many of that is based on the idea of things like interest banking, because you can use your property as you see fit according to liberalism, so why not lend your money out to other people to use, and they pay you back the same amount of money, the principal sum, plus extra. Well, the problem with that is you have all these rich people lending money to the poor people, and the poor people paying them back plus extra. Where's the net flow of money going to go? The net flow. It's going to go from the bottom up, from the poor to the rich. Right? It creates it creates a skewed and disproportionate distribution of wealth. Whereas in Islam, it actually views the purpose of the economic system as not production, it's distribution. And in this sense, Islam prohibits interest banking, full stop. Prohibits it, allows a free market with no regulation, actually, because once you've prohibited the things that cause the trouble, why need to regulate them? Right? They're already prohibited. And the zakat tax, which Muslims pay 2.5%, is not an income tax, it's a wealth tax. When the rich people get their money, they make profit, they pay about 50% of their, sometimes 60, sometimes even 70%. And you think that's big tax. Yes, but once they got that money, it's theirs. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The wealth tax is not an income tax, it's a tax of the money they are holding. Right? Wealth tax. And did you know that, I think it was, if I remember, I think it was not Amnesty International, it was, actually it'll come to me in a second, there was a global institution, that a think tank that did research and discovered that if the top, let's say 10% or 5% of rich people just paid 1.5% of their wealth, it would basically solve world hunger. Right. Anyway, so to conclude, Islam looks and feels like it comes from the creator of the universe. It deals with human nature. It explains all the phenomena that you see in the universe, all our experience of it, life, inanimate matter, animate matter, all things are explained by Islam. In fact, I would dare say it's the only possible explanation that makes sense and while avoiding contradictions internally and externally. And finally, Islam deals with happiness as contentment. Contentment in remembrance of your Creator, in having that relationship with the Creator, because there's nothing, because human needs are infinite, then it requires only something that can be infinite as well to satisfy that. And that's a metaphorical statement, of course. So thank you for listening, and I welcome your questions, comments, of course, and contentions.
Thank you very much, guys, for listening. Due to the constraints of time and the need to create Melbourne, for those that want to create it, we're going to do the question and answers for those that want to stay, do question and answers now, and for those that want to pray, they can go pray. We're going to pray outside together, and you can do a question and answer with the speaker after, if you'd like, as well. So those that like to pray, we're going to go pray now, and those that like to stay, go question and answer.
Because I'm traveling, so I'm combining. So I'll combine for the purposes of the benefit of those who are not praying. To answer your questions, comments, and contentions. So let more people go into Okay, so questions, comments, and contentions. You, sir, you have some. Okay, so a child that dies in Africa hunger. And your other question was how do we explain a child that was sexually assaulted by their parents or others? Right?
I suppose that following this kind of thought that people in the plan, God, servant, etc., should avoid this kind of things because it hurts his children, humans.
Okay. So to repeat what the gentleman said, that how are these things part of God's plan when God should avoid harming and hurting his children? That's the represented what you just said correctly. Yeah. Okay. So we make the assumption that the purpose of everything in this universe is for this universe, right? But everyone's going to die. Right? Everyone in this universe, every living thing, and the universe itself at some point, at least from our perspective anyway, will end. Right? Whether you live let's assume there's no soul, right? There's no souls. And consciousness is just something that magically appears in people but ends when you die. Whether you lived a completely happy life with enjoyments and loads of pleasure, or you lived a completely miserable and horrific life with lots of physical harm and even a shorter life, you died very early in your life. The end result, ultimately, in such a universe I just described, would be the same. Because whether you lived a completely fulfilled life or an unfulfilled life, you'd all die and you would cease to exist and it would be virtually the same. In 1 billion years' time, in the big scheme of things, it wouldn't even matter. The little speck that you were and the brief existence, the brief flash of existence that you have. That's actually how kind of a materialist might frame that kind of viewpoint. And I've seen materialists ask this question. They've struggled to answer it in a way that didn't seem bleak and stark. But that being said, is that you again make a similar assumption to what I mentioned before in this lecture, that the purpose of things in this universe are to create a utopic universe, a universe of pleasure and fun and enjoyment and so on and so forth. No, I know, but it's a hidden presumption that you yourself don't realize. Because, how is it part of God's plan for these things to happen? But what do you mean by his plan? As in plan to create what? To create a utopia of this universe? No, because this universe, obviously, there's no utopia in this universe. It's just, it is what it is. Things change, different things happen, different objects, and some people have a brief experience of this universe. Some animals have a brief experience of the universe. Some have longer experience of this universe. Different things happen to different things. The purpose of this universe and everything that exists, its own existence is a testament to the Creator. That things exist, change, develop, are finite, are limited, is a testament to the existence of the Creator. That's one thing. So all these things that can happen, they don't diminish what reality fundamentally is, what the universe is as in total. Every living thing, everything that exists is a testament to the Creator making these things and making these things exist in the first place. And as I said, God doesn't know anyone anything, right? If he gives you 5 seconds of life, he will give someone 50 years of life. He didn't owe you 50 years of life or 100 years of life. He doesn't owe it to you. Right? So there's no injustice in that sense from God. Right? There's no injustice from God. However, because God gave us 2 things, intellect, to understand good and bad, and free will, to choose it. Because choosing to follow what God has taught you is a greater glorification of God than simply in a robot just doing whatever God puts in. So then free will has to be allowed, and free will has to have opportunity to manifest itself in doing what goes against God's commands, which goes against human nature. Because human nature and God's commands must be identical. Right? What God intended you to be, intended for you to do, must be consistent with your nature. God wouldn't tell you to do something that's against your nature, right? Because then God would be inconsistent. He made your nature, and then he tells you to go against it, be inconsistent, right? So God must be consistent, right? Because it's all from His will. So when someone commits rape or kills someone, or when some human being neglects their family, their human family across the world, and that person dies because of it, that was there to manifest free will of that person They have a choice to neglect, they have a choice to commit crimes, and then there will be a reality beyond this universe. Because they have free will, they will face a special accountability for not following the commands of God, for caring for other human beings, for creating a better health system to minimize deaths, for preventing deaths from hunger, and from restraining themselves from committing violent crimes against other human beings, rape and murder and so on and so forth. Right? But of course, if people didn't have the desire to do these crimes in the first place, then they wouldn't have free will, they wouldn't have the opportunity for free will to manifest. Because there's no point if I told you, like if I gave you a command and said, I command you not to throw yourself off a cliff, right? Well, you don't feel like throwing yourself off a cliff, you're not going to do that. I'm not going to say, oh, thanks for obeying me. I didn't obey you, I don't feel like doing it, right? Obeying comes if you feel suicidal. Right? Then that's where obeying can have the opportunity to manifest itself. Right? So all these bad things happen because it allows and facilitates free will. But God is not being unjust for allowing these things to happen because you're assuming that God owes everything in this universe. And it's an assumption maybe you don't realize, but it's an assumption that you think that that this universe must be utopia. It's not. This universe is for experiencing. As a one who has a soul in your body, your purpose was to experience God's creation, and because you're human, it was to make choices. That's it. That's the core purpose of the universe. You're going to see some good stuff, you're going to see some bad stuff, you have a choice now, and you're here to experience it. Right? That's the purpose. God transcends these human moralities, but he's also just and merciful because hereafter there will be a redress to these things.
I have one more.
Okay?
How we can solve the Epicurean paradox?
The Epicurean paradox.
Yes.
Well, I kind of responded.
It's a kind of, what you propose is a kind of solution. Because the Epicurean paradox starts with the comment, if God is willing to present evil that is not able, then he's not only.
It's not omnipotence, yeah. But if he is able to prevent it but allows it anyway, then he must be evil. And if he's neither omnipotent, he's not omnipotent, nor willing, then why call him God or why worship him? Yeah, and the Epicurean paradox. Epicurus, an atheist, of course, came up with that idea to try to challenge the idea of God. Well, he was challenging the Greek idea of gods, which was, see, if you're a Greek polytheist, and polytheism is really a corruption of monotheism, and it's an anthropomorphization of God, which we view to be one of the biggest sins in Islam, is to make God finite, or to view him in a finite way, that he's finite in any way, shape, or form, to make him in the image of human beings, right? Like Xenophanes, he said that if cows had a god, or gods, they would look like cows, right? Because they would make him in their image. Xenophanes was actually a monotheist, by the way. He actually rejected polytheism based on arguments. He rejected Xenophanes, the Greek philosopher, the one who came up with the idea that if cows had gods, they would make them out to be their own image. He used it to reject Greek polytheism and come to a belief that there's only one God that doesn't have image, is not a creature, doesn't look like a finite thing. Right? Some atheists use his argument without realizing that he was actually a proper monotheist, like a Muslim would recognize. Yeah. Anyway, the Greeks had the idea that the Greek gods were basically your genies, let's just say, wish genies, right? You sacrifice to them, you give them stuff, and they do good stuff for you, right? And then, if the gods are there to serve you, or to kind of have a relationship to you, or towards you, with giving you things, then they don't give you stuff, or they let bad stuff happen to you, then why are you praying to them? Right? That was Epicurus' argument. But from the Islamic perspective, firstly, God doesn't owe you anything. And the purpose of everything that exists in this universe is just to exist, because its existence is a manifestation of God's power. Everything, as the Quran says, is an ayat of Allah, in Arabic, which means a sign of God. The universe is a sign of God. Right? Everything is a sign of God. Everything that occurs. So everything that exists in this universe exists. Its fundamental purpose is just to be a sign of God's power to create in the first place. and to glorify Him by basically being opposite to Him. Right? And we're a special subset of that because we have free will. Because free will allows us the possibility to voluntarily choose God, which is a greater glorification than a robot that doesn't have a will, or a rock that doesn't have a choice to be a rock and to react like a rock. So what you call bad is just things which is displeasing to you, displeasing and painful. But pain and pleasure both are signs of God. So God transcends what you might call good and bad. Or we say that God is just and God is merciful because in the hereafter there will be a redress. Because as a human being, you're not allowed to be unjust to another human being. That's going against God's commands for your nature. And if you do so, there will be a redress for that. And if you follow God's commands, or if you try to follow God's commands and so on, your reward will be a reality after this reality, which will be complete, perfect contentment and happiness, and which you might call complete satisfaction. And if you choose to go against God's command, and to reject the creator of this universe that sustains your very existence and created in the first place, which we call gratitude, and kufr na'ma, kufr nimma, gratitude, a rejection of and gratitude, then your reality after this will be one of constant frustration to the most perfect form of frustration, pain. Right. That's the consistency of the situation. So you're looking at bad things in this universe. It's bad from your perspective as a human being, as in you find it to be, and as I do, heinous, disgusting, horrible, and so on. Of course, and you're given those attributes to react that way. But in the grand cosmic scheme of things, there's no injustice happening. In this, in terms of God is not being unjust to you. Humans are being unjust to each other, but God is not being unjust to anyone. If the very fact that even if a baby dies after 10 minutes of life, that 10 minutes is actually a gift, right? The baby's not owed 100 years of life. You're not owed 100 years of life. So as much as you live in this life, every second is a gift, right? Anyone else? Comments, questions, contentions? You, brother.
I'm just curious because of the sort of types of happiness and contentment.
Yes.
I was just wondering, what does Islam say about or heaven or happiness? Yeah, I was just thinking of heaven. Heaven and happiness and contentment. What does Islam say about paradise or heaven?
Okay, so what does Islam say about paradise? Some people, depending on their backgrounds and what they taught, built a hereafter whereby there's a universe where you have physical pleasures as well as spiritual pleasures. But they find it that physical pleasures it's kind of very uncouth. I don't like that. I thought that would just be spiritual pleasures or spiritual content or a nirvana type situational scenario. And that's an assumption they came up with because maybe certain cultures and religions they came from juxtaposed material pleasures and made it different from quote-unquote spiritual pleasures, right? Whatever that definition is. Like serene, transcendental contentment or nirvana or what have you, right? Well, nirvana kind of really means self-annihilation, I think, but anyway. It's all roksha, right? Self-annihilation, which is in the karmic religions. But what they don't realize is that as God created human beings, right, with our bodies and our desires that accompany this stuff. So why does the hereafter, I mean, you have material pleasures in this life and you have pains in this life. So why is there not a reality where reward in the next life includes material pleasures? Why should the hereafter be any different to this life? And people say, oh, well, you're saying after this you die and after the universe is, let's say, destroyed or what have you, there's going to be something else that will be, you'll have like, abodes and rivers and valleys and fields and things. Oh, that's ridiculous. Say, well, you have it now, just not in a perfect form, let's just say, but you have it now. And that's not ridiculous. Right? Maybe there's a universe before this one where, you know, this universe was described and people didn't believe it because, well, I mean, you know, they didn't believe it because they think, oh, how can you make this stuff? How can you make a sun, an orb in the sky? Like, it's, what you think is ridiculous is due to your assumptions you make about things. Right? So hereafter, why would that not be for human beings who have free will and used it in the right way to have the reward as human beings? Can understand reward. Not just physical pleasures, but also, you know, contentment of the heart. Because there are different types of pleasure that humans can experience. Material pleasures, yes, and ongoing contentment. Being at peace with oneself, viewing that you're following your purpose, and you're having the pleasure of the Creator. The Creator is pleased with, using a metaphorical sense, but pleased with that you chose to use the gift of free will and the gift of your intellect to follow and to obey the Creator voluntarily. Everything in the universe follows natural law. They don't have a choice in it. You do. And you choose it. You choose to follow what the Creator has commanded of you. That deserves reward then. And if you don't, and you're showing gratitude, then that will deserve punishment. Because you went against your very purpose. Trying to seek sensual gratification, therefore in the hereafter you'll face the opposite of sensual gratification. And if by choosing God you denied some of your sensual gratification in this life, when it was inconsistent with your nature and so on, then you'll get perfect sensual gratification in the next life without any pain or suffering. So it's actually quite consistent. And why wouldn't it be that way? Now of course, Islam isn't the first. I would say it isn't the first iteration of divine revelation to mankind, and it's why you see a hereafter present in most other religions and civilizations. Not because it's a big coincidence, it's because Islam isn't the first time human beings have received revelation from prophets. But unfortunately, over many civilizations, and this is where Islam has an explanation for the history, for human history, is that every nation, every civilization received prophets from God saying the same things. Some of their teachings still survive in certain forms, but a lot of it's corrupted. But you'll still see it. Many civilizations you can even see it by, archaeologists have noted that the further you go in a civilization, certainly big like China, ancient China, they believed in one god, Shangdi, for example, but eventually all the gods were added later on. Catholicism, let's just say, right? And this is what Protestants will argue. Catholics believe obviously one God, and the Ten Commandments are, thou shalt not make graven images. Don't make images. And yet Catholics, after many, they've made statues of different saints. And now as a Catholic, you don't pray to the God anymore, you pray to a saint, and via that saint will grant you certain things. And each saint has a specialism. Patron saint of travelers, patron saint of, of healing, and what have you. You pray to specific ones. And what happens when you look at polytheism, like Greek and Egyptian polytheism, multiple gods, each god has a specialism that you pray to. Because the assumption is that the head god is too far removed to notice you, and so you need to use intermediaries, secretaries, things like that. Intercessors, right? That's how religion, monotheism, becomes corrupted over time by human beings. Instead of trying to get closer to God, metaphorically, they make God closer to themselves in image, so they can look at. You understand? Because humans can't, not humans generally, but many humans fall foul of wanting to have a relationship with God like they do with other human beings, something you can see, because it feels more gratifying to pray to something and imagine it looking at you, and then just seeing it and like, oh, that's God with this divine spark in here and what have you. So Catholicism, and this is just my assertion, I mean no offense to any Catholics here, but I come from a Catholic background, by the way, but Catholicism is what happened to all the civilizations playing out right in front of your eyes. You're seeing it as different, and Protestant Christians make the same arguments. That's why Protestant churches tend to have no statues in them, because they say they follow the Ten Commandments, which is, well, one of the Ten Commandments, at the very least, which is make no graven images. They don't obviously honor the Sabbath. right? Christians moved it to Sunday with no authority from Jesus or from obviously the book of the Old Testament. But they just said, let's have a meal let's have a celebration on Sundays. Anyway, but over time, humans corrupt religion, make it more like themselves, change it to their own way. And just look what's happening for you Muslims in the audience. Just look what happened with some Muslims who live in the West and they want to bring liberal ideas into Islam and say, oh, maybe, you can drink a bit of alcohol and, why are you making it so difficult on yourself? Just liberalize this and liberalize it and make it permissible this. Of course, polygamy, no. That goes against the society that we're in. So that we should stop. It's like, that's kind of even weird, because even according to liberalism, polygamy should be allowed because it's consensual. So, but because the whole society views it to be taboo, they also want it to be taboo for Muslims. Right? The assimilation into your whole society, that's basically what Christianity happened to Christianity. Right? Was it St. Paul? Right? St. Paul, he was summoned by the Church of Jerusalem, a council. They said, we hear rumors that you've been telling Gentiles they don't have to follow the law of Moses anymore. He's like, no, that's a lie. It's in the book of Acts, by the way, for those of you who want to reference it. It's a lie, I don't do that's wrong. But should Gentiles follow the law of Moses? It's a bit difficult for them. I mean, circumcision, it's not going to be appealing to guys, right? Gentile guys, right? So he asked for a compromise. But they said, okay, but Christian Gentiles, or Gentiles who adopt the religion, then call themselves Christian at that time anyway, they have to not eat meat sacrificed to idols, or eat carrion meat that has blood in it when it dies. Like roadkill, that's carrion, right? You're not allowed that if you're a Jew, you're not allowed that if you're an early Christian. But then later on, like as Paul, Roman citizen, he spent some time amongst Gentiles and Romans and Greeks and what have you. Later on he says, you know what? He wrote something, the letter of him writing to someone else. You know what? It doesn't matter what you put inside your body. It's what's in the heart that counts. And many Muslims might be laughing because you hear the same arguments from liberal reformers. And say, it's not about looking a certain way or doing so. It's what's in the heart that matters, right? That was St. Paul's argument. Same argument. He used to abrogate the teachings of Jesus, which he was told to follow by the Council of Jerusalem, headed by James, the alleged half-brother of Jesus and leader of the early Christian community in Jerusalem. Check it for yourself. No, don't take my word for it. Check it for yourself. Just Google St. Paul, Council of Jerusalem, and dietary laws. Google it for yourself. Right? And then Google Paul's later works where he said at a later date that, you don't have to. It's what matters is what's in the heart. Well, he was not told that command by the council of Jews, by the companions of Jesus who met Jesus. He was told that was not to command that, but he did because it's easier for Gentiles, right? For converting to that new religion. Greeks, basically, converting to that new religion. Same happened for Muslims in this country, liberalizing us. Assimilation into the host culture, right? It's a standard thing. So Christianity is what you get when you assimilate, when a religion is assimilated into a host culture. Everything different between Christianity and Judaism is all due to Greco-Roman culture. Anyway, I think I over-answered the question. My apologies. Anyone else? You, madam? Okay. discussed before that law became law in France, and I'm talking about the law specifically about banning British symbols in schools, because clearly it wasn't implemented prior to the last 2 decades, right? So it was implemented after that, point in time when they decided to implement it. It was discussed more specifically and majoritarily, or almost exclusively actually, the issue of Muslim women and what the hijab represents. And the hijab was discussed as a political symbol, which represents a potential existential threat to the secular nature of the République Française. So they specifically discussed it in the context of targeting the hijab itself and the Muslim kind of wearing of it, citing it as a political symbol. That was their argument for it, actually. And I made a claim. I actually have a number of papers I can send to you. So if I remind me, I'll send it to you guys, and then you kind of, if any of you are interested to read it yourself, send it out to everybody else. But just remind me though. And they were specifically discussing that one issue. I remember because I started this issue to specifically engage on this topic, right? And you're right, the French, well, the thing is, the French secularism, or laicité, was enshrined in the public actually only in the early 20th century, actually, the secular nature of the Fourth Republic, right? Whereas prior to that, I mean, the French Revolution actually technically failed, and there was a restoration of monarchy and what have you, right? So that actually failed ultimately. But it kind of was, the spirit was revived with the idea of making France a country of laicité, and the French approach to secularism was rather different to the English and American approach, or at least approach to government. So in America, they believe what's more important was protection of the people from the government. In England, it was protection of the people from each other, and in France, it was protection of the people from religion. And the only way to guarantee freedom from religion was to maintain these limits against what they viewed as to be social pressure that religion can exert. But it went beyond that because more specifically it was a xenophobic reaction to Islam. Because right now in France, and I was shocked by this, Catholic schools, which are religious institutions, are actually allowed to disfund with state funds given to them in Catholic schools. Because that's a historic religion of France, right? Which is part of the hypocrisy of France. And it's very clear xenophobic nature. So that was the discussion, and the same with the niqab ban as well. Oh, we'll ban it for everybody, except if you want to wear masks for like parties and things like that. Oh, okay, well, that's allowed, right? And so this is the hypocrisy of the French application of law. Of course, because of the nature of liberalism, you have to apply law universally. It can't be only against one minority specifically. It's not linked to the nature of a person, but rather it must be a blanket law. But as I said, two wolves and a sheep having a democratic vote as to what to have for dinner, right? You know, that's what's going to happen. So that's why I would disagree with you on that matter, that it was specifically discussed to target Muslims by their own admission, and I made that claim, so I'm going to send you the kind of the legal files and documents of French legal theorists discussing the pros and cons of that, and you can see that why are they discussing it, why they really are. Islam was front and center of the reason. I mean, it wasn't fear of Catholicism or fear of Judaism that made them, and then they'd say that anyway, right? But it was Islam front and center. But they just, I think what you mean when you say it was an old law, there was a link to an old law. No, they cited old principles of the Republic of laicité, and that law that made secularism the fundamental principle of the French state, which was only in the early 20th century. They cited that law, yes, as a justification for a new code for governing French schools. So anyway, but thank you for the question. As I said, I wanted to be challenged because I made claims, so please challenge me. And I've actually still made claims, I haven't justified it because I can't magic up the document on the screen, but I'll give the ISOC the documents and they'll give it to you and then you can see. And if you want it, everyone else just ask the ISOC and then because I don't have it to hand or put it on the PowerPoint. Anyone have any comments, questions or contentions? But anything else I've said or you want to continue? Playing enough thought. Well, you first and then you.
Was a comment slash, I'm trying to think of what my question is. Actually, yeah, the question. I kind of, similar. I kind of started with a Catholic background. Well, I guess I don't really call myself a Catholic, I'm a Christian. So I kind of saw some of the potholes or the things that I guess Catholics kind of follow, or some of the sectors of Christianity follow. And I was wondering what brought you to Islam? Or, what brought you to?
What was Islam? Well, it's pretty much, as I've outlined, with a bit more stuff on top of that, which is, I mean, look, I've had about actually an hour and a half to explain to you only one angle into it, and it was mostly to kind of demolish your underlying presuppositions that could be an obstacle to you actually considering certain ideas, such as the idea of good and bad being greater than just pain and pleasure, for example. That's the underlying obstacle that many people use to deny God's existence, even. And many people reject Islam because they feel it to be incompatible with liberalism. But liberalism hasn't been justified, nor does it have a consistent or coherent intellectual justification. And I've read all the justifications by, Hobbes wasn't liberal per se, he was just more secular. He was secular, he wasn't liberal actually. It was John Locke and Baruch Spinoza, Rousseau, John Stuart Mill, and many others who kind of brought the justifications that are now commonplace, right? For those who try to justify liberalism. But now, in this day and age, most people consider it to be a dogma. So merely to cite that we're all equal and we all should deserve freedom is taken to be a platitude and a virtue signaling, right? Just to reiterate the current dogma that people can't justify. Because I could argue that we're not equal, actually, from many angles. We all have different capacities and capabilities, right? Different intellectual strengths. Some have stronger immune systems than others, or maybe are immune to certain diseases that others are not immune to. You have different physical capabilities, and in essence, and different reproductive capabilities. Who said you're equal? Because in the natural world, nature, quote unquote, let's just say, doesn't seem to care about equality of all animals and things, even within the same species, right? Weaker animals might get oppressed by bigger animals, and that just seems to be the norm. Whether we invent the idea that humans are the exception to the rule, right? And I could come from that angle, right? Of course, in Islam, equality is that all human beings who reach adulthood and have the same faculties are all equal in the eyes of God. Or start out equal in the eyes of God. And even then, you become unequal because those who choose to worship God and to obey God are different to those who don't. Okay? And the Quran actually, when you use the word equality in the Quran, equal, in the Quran actually comes up in more context of not equal are those who stand and sit, not equal are those who stand and sit for justice or stand and sit for for doing the good, those who want to get up and do it, those who want to sit down and not do it, they're not the same. Yeah. So one of the great things about Islam is that your worth as an individual is totally in your control, depending on how you choose, or what virtue you choose to pursue, how you choose to pursue it, whether you want to be more virtuous or less virtuous. It's in your control, not your wealth, not even your intellectual capacity. Right? Which in this society might actually determine your wealth in a meritocratic society, your value in a meritocratic society, or certainly amongst women, the aesthetic appearance is also a measure of social status in Islam. Aesthetic appearance means nothing. Right? Whereas what you choose to do makes you a good person, and what you choose not to do makes you a worse person, or what have you. You can choose your own worth, basically, by choosing to follow your purpose or not. That's the fundamental, you could say, the real egalitarianism of Islam. And there's no one who's default better than anyone else, just from a accident of birth. Right? And I guess someone might say, well, in liberal society, no one's better than anybody else. Well, actually, you can be if you're more intelligent and you're a successful business person, and you can even have more rights. And you might think, how is that possible, right? Well, everyone has a freedom of speech, they say, yeah? Freedom of speech. The right to be heard. Well, that's not actually a right, actually, because people don't have to, people can't be forced to hear you, right? Yeah. But I'm pretty sure that Rupert Murdoch has more freedom of speech than you do, right? The owner of multiple media outlets, right? So controls much more platform, a platform that's much more widely heard than anything that most of us could ever achieve in our lifetime anyway. It's got more freedom of speech than you, right? Basically, if there's a battle between his opinion versus yours, his opinion is going to get more airtime than yours, just put it like that. Even though you have legal equality with him. Yeah? So the problem with liberalism is that it creates it thinks that it can create equality by creating a level playing field, but it doesn't realize that the players are different strengths, and some people don't even know how to play the game properly. And who wins? Those who are the players with the A at the end. yeah, they win. The strong ones can win, and will win and exploit the weaker ones. And it happens in all kinds of things, not just economics, even in dating, right? Those are the players, right, as they say. Let's just say alpha males, which know how to say the right kind of formulaic words that most women will generally respond positively to, will tend to have a disproportionate number of mates, or women, obviously, than men who are not able to. Sometimes are called the beta males, right? And what are you going to do? And they might even, there might be, what you'll get is a society where it might be skewed or slanted. I think there was this survey done of, I think it was a survey of Tinder, and they asked questions to people on Tinder. I think it was Tinder. They said that basically they asked people to rate certain images and people and what have you. And what they discovered was that 80% of women were generally attracted to most men. Only 20% of women were attractive. So 20% of men, only 20% of men were rated to be attractive to about 80% of women or whatever. It's like a complete different scoop. So imagine that playing out in society. You'll have most women at least having relationships with a very small minority of men, and most men basically not being able to have relationships, or at least relationships with those maybe they would have preferred anyway, because you have this kind of skewed situation. And with alpha male, you might wonder why this is, but just remember something, right? If an alpha male who knows how to utter a certain formulaic kind of approach to women, which works, if he has one woman, why do you think he's going to stop at one woman when he can get more? Then it's conscious of opportunity cost, right? And if your purpose of your life is to seek sensual gratification, and nothing is more gratifying sensually than in the initial feelings of romance, when with a new person, they're going to keep seeking that. The initial feelings you feel with a new person, that will be the new norm for the person that can get that. So they'll have a new relationship, it'll get stale or boring, quote unquote, and they'll leave it and get another one. Chasing the high, right? Like drugs. How does liberalism prevent that? It doesn't. Whereas Islamic courtship kind of system, where you have women are protected by a sort of, you could say, a barrier to these kind of alpha players, right? Which is a wali, right? Which is basically a father or brother or someone who is a guy themselves and knows how guys think, and in theory anyway, should be able to filter out the players from those who actually are serious and genuine and are virtuous. Right? At least better than what it is now in an anarchic system, anyway. Right? Although, as I said, there's good ways of implementing, there's bad ways of implementing. Like when Muslims no longer consider virtue to be an issue, but more background and culture and ethnicity, then that causes problems because Islam doesn't care about culture and ethnicity and background. But certain Muslims, certainly after colonialism, certainly care about it now. Right? And that causes problems within that system. Then the system doesn't work anymore, it breaks down. But certainly what impressed me about Islam was it has a system to manage that. Right? So that if you're serious about marriage, you should have a right to find someone who's also serious about marriage. And it's not fake. Right? But you won't know that as someone going on Tinder looking for your Prince Charming. You know, I don't think that's going to be anyone's story. Like, yeah, so kids, how I met your father was we went on Tinder, and and it was just romance. It was just there we go. You know, that's the way to go. No, that's not really likely to meet. What's it called? Mr. Right. You'll just be likely to meet Mr. Right now. Anyway, and the same is for men on all the sides of the fence as well, for men as well. So Islam has a way of regulating interactions so that it guarantees the greater satisfaction for the most people, more than the anarchic system of liberalism, which doesn't have any kind of guidance in this way. It just says, learn from your mistakes. And like 15 mistakes later, you know, hopefully by the time you're like 42, you'll be able to know how to determine a bad guy from a good guy, right? Not really the ideal situation. Not really the ideal situation. Was humans really meant to live like that? That's what got me into Islam. Things like that just seem to agree with human nature. And organized it in such a beautiful way, harmonious way. Like it came from the creator of humans. Any other questions, comments, or
So
concerns?
was it a case of that you looked yourself at something that maybe about I was basically whether it was you that was just curious about other things, or was that somebody told you about Islam?
Also, was I just curious about this stuff, or did someone teach me about Islam? I was just curious because I was 10 years old, and surprisingly, just so you know, studies have shown that in men, for example, boys around 10, 11, 12 years old, they kind of reach almost genius levels of kind of intellect, and then it kind of seems to go down from there when the hormones come, and then only afterwards it kind of goes back up again, right? This is kind of a strange phenomenon. But women to a degree too. You ever find boys and kids, and boys and girls around that age actually surprisingly intelligent for their age, around 10, 11, 12, right? Yeah, don't dismiss them, right? Don't dismiss them. It's actually, I think most kids, most humans at that age actually are very, very sharp, very, very intelligent. But it's only that they're told to just play games or football or computer, go on the computer and play, multiplayer games, whatever. That kind of leaves a missed opportunity. But I just thought to myself, look, I'm going to spend the rest of my life living as a human, right? And I need to know what to do, right? I need to know what am I going to be living for what purpose? And I just saw that you live and you get a house and you get a job and you get a car and you get a family and then you have kids and then you die and then they just repeat the same cycle again and their kids repeat the same cycle. I just thought to myself, what's the point of that? Right? Is that it? Is that just what it is? Must be something greater than that. And that's what kind of got me into thinking about stuff. And then I realized, well, am I a Christian just because I was born in a Christian country? If I was born in India, would I be, I don't know, Hindu or what have you? Right? I need to ask these questions. And so that's what got me to study these things. Because if I'm going to live my life for something, I want to make sure that I'm living it for something that's worthwhile and has meaning, and I'm not wasting my time, basically. And so, yeah. And I was very skeptical. And by the way, my natural approach to things is being skeptical. So I try to actually refute everything I encounter by trying to find loopholes in them, including Islam. Obviously, you can see how successful I was at that concerning Islam. And so yeah, that was kind of my approach. So, right, you said that.
Yeah, talking about Sunday, you said earlier that white Christians want the Sunday as the rest day. Those Egyptians Hebrews used Sabbath. But in the Bible, in Genesis, first chapter, when he says that God Sunday created the earth, because the interpretation of if you work 7 days
gentleman said that Christians interpreted from the Old Testament book of Genesis that God rested, quote unquote, on the seventh day, and so Christians thought, well, why don't we rest on the seventh day as well, which is Sunday, and why did Muslims change that? Well, again, and here's an assumption, the root of all falsehood is assumption. Who says Sunday is the seventh day? Right? Yom al-Sabt.
Sunday means okay. Sunday means the day of the sun.
Well, okay. Well, day of the sun is that's more of a pagan Greek thing. But just to answer your point, in Hebrew and obviously in Arabic, the word for Sunday is Yom al-Awwal, which is the first day. Yom al-Sabt, like it is in or Shabbat, which is in Hebrew, similar from Arabic as well, means the seventh day. Saturday is the seventh day.
Yes.
Right? Not the Sunday. And that's what you posit is actually not the argument that was advanced or how it emerged from Christians amongst Christians. Basically, Paul's teachings became the more popular version of Christianity, and not to follow the old Jewish laws anymore. Christians were going to go their own way, and even though they still held the Decalogue, the ten rules, the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, they still held it to be special, but they never didn't seem to follow anymore, which means keep the Sabbath holy. Anyway, so in essence, because Paul at one point on a Sunday was having some breaking bread with his companions and what have you, it became like a practice that Christians started to do based on Paul's practice of just breaking bread and having supper on the Sunday, basically, right? And then Christians said, well, you know what, Jesus came back from the dead on Sunday. Sunday's like, Sunday's a special day. Why not just make Sunday a special day? And that basically it became a tradition not based on scripture, but became so popular that it became later established by the Catholic churches. This is the Orthodox day of this is the day of rest for Christians, but it has no basis in the Bible or any of the commands of Jesus at all. Not even in the New Testament or the alleged command of Jesus doesn't exist. It was a practice that kind of became popular because Paul, there's a reference to Paul breaking bread and having some food with his disciples. Not a religious ceremony, although it was with his breaking bread and giving thanks, but that was it. But then again, Christians are always told to give thanks when they eat.
Even in this point of view, every religion doesn't have one day that everybody has. For example, the Jews have the Sabbath.
Yeah, but I'm saying that Christians have no argument to change the Saturday to the Sunday. That was my point. Yom al-Sabt or Yom al-Shabbat.
My counter argument is that it is in the Bible in that way that we can interpret that Sunday can be used like this.
Well, you might argue that Sunday can be used like that, and that's fine if you want to use it like that. From your belief, you don't want to obviously not accept an Islamic perspective, but it's not commanded to. Whereas Jews are commanded to, and one could argue that the early disciples of Jesus still acted like they were under the law of Moses. Apart from, well, Paul is not a disciple of Jesus because he never met him, but by his own admission. But I'm saying that it's not based in the Bible as a commandment. The only commandment in the Bible is keep the Sabbath holy, the seventh day, Saturday. Now, as for Muslims, you asked a second question, which I think is very pertinent, which is how come Muslims don't follow Yom al-Sabt, but we follow on the Friday, we have congregational prayer. Well, the thing is this, that it is, God gives commands, right? And he shows revelation to different peoples. So there are certain things that won't change, right? The things that the obligation of prayer, right? Fasting is also something that he said to different peoples beforehand. Fasting as a worship of God. Abstaining from carrion meat seems to be a consistent command that God has sent in the past, the Jewish beliefs and the Old Testament or anything to go by. So then, these things don't change. But the language of your prayer can change. So obviously, for Jews it's Hebrew, and for Muslims from an Arabic context, it's Arabic. Let's just say, these are arbitrary things that God can decide to change, not depending on the civilization he's revealing it to. And of course, because the missions, or you could say, not necessarily the missions, but rather the previous two movements prior to us failed in their objectives from the Islamic perspective, right? To spread monotheism to the world. Instead, they got corrupted by the world themselves, you know, the pagan invasions of the kingdom of Moses and the kingdom of David came in, and Christianity was a hybrid of now Greco-Roman culture. It's no longer what we would consider to be the original teachings of Jesus. Now a kind of a reiteration of the same, of a timeless religion, but in a new form, in the Arabic-speaking form now. So Prophet Muhammad in Arabia came, and to demarcate it as a new, you could say covenant if you want to view it as that, our day is Friday instead. Right, so Sabbath was for the Jews initially, but now God has put Friday. And as the Quran explains, it's up to God's prerogative to give laws and take laws, to move laws and take laws. But it'd be strange if there's a law that was radically different from given to mankind from something else that was against nature. Like if interest banking was allowed before, now it's not allowed, or it was prohibited before, now it's allowed. These things wouldn't make sense. That would be a big problem. It would make you doubt the claim that this is a new religion from God if it has something completely different to what was said before. And just so you know, I think it's in Leviticus, Jews are forbidden from interest banking, and Christians follow that law prior to, I think, the Renaissance era, and then they start to change it. They start to change that law and justify the changing of that law as well. But Muslims, we still follow the same law that was given to Moses. And many Jews practice that prohibition. Some Christians even practice that prohibition of the prohibition of interest as well. The Seventh-day Adventists, they're known as. Why they call Seventh-day Adventists, just for any of you want to know about this, Seventh day is a clue. They view that you should follow the Ten Commandments, even as Christians, and so they keep the Sabbath holy still. Right. Anyway, we had a bit of Christianity discussion there, actually. But thank you for the question. That was a good, interesting question and point. So,
Can we just, for the sake of time, because the booking is over for 10 o'clock, can we just end it there? If you've got any questions, you just ask the speaking person.
I tell you what, if you allow me to race just 5 minutes, I'll take the last round and we'll answer very quickly, like quick fire answers. So you had your hand up first, then the man there, and then the gentleman at the end. So you quickly. Sir?
Where did this idea of doctrine or for the Trinity come into play? And are there any old scriptures that refute that in Christian texts that may not have been altered?
The Trinity. I might be having a debate in London on the 3rd of May on that precise question with the Christian Scholar of America. So you can refer to that there. Long story short, the Trinity was an adaptation of Plato's cosmology and then Neoplatonic ideas later on, borrowed into Christianity. Quick fire answer. You, madam, had a question? Okay, so the lady said that in corporal punishment, you might be able to go home to your parents or family or what have you that day, but you carry the consequences of that with the rest of your life. And in an incarceration-based system, you serve your time and then you can walk away and start a new life. Well, firstly, not with a criminal record. Secondly, is a lot of corporal punishment doesn't leave anything permanent on the body. But if you're referring to the punishment for theft, which is quite infamous in Western media and so on, it actually only applies on people who are not poor and are basically career criminals. And if you look at the statistics, what they'll show you is that those who reoffend, about 80%, roughly around 80% of reoffenders actually are 5% of criminals. So basically, 5% of criminals are repeat offenders, constituting the majority of crime in most cases. If you can impair their ability to commit further crime with something permanent, because they seem to be doing it currently, you basically get rid of the majority of crime overnight, so to speak. That's why ultimately it's actually a much wiser idea for those who are those kleptomaniacs who want to do it just for fun, and they're perfectly sane individuals, no mental problems or whatever, because obviously you can't punish people if they have mental problems, and in Islam you can't punish people for theft if they do it because they're poor, by the way. Most people don't realize that. Right? Why punish poor people for stealing to survive? That's the shame on the state and everyone else for you not helping them. And last question from the gentleman at the time.
You know, you said for something to be created, there must be motivation behind it.
The Muslim to be what, sorry?
Motivation behind it, I think you said that.
For what, sorry?
For something to be created, I think. So.
For something to be created? No, for something to be created, there must be will, yes.
Okay, so what motivated God to create us? And if He's limitless, what was He doing before He created us? And you know how everything created must have a limit.
Yeah.
So everything that's created must have a limit. What about the afterlife? Because that's limitless.
Okay. So I'll do it in reverse order. You said everything that created must have a limit. What about the afterlife? Now, the afterlife is not infinite, it's just perpetual. There's a difference between that, right? In that, at any point in time in the afterlife, only a finite amount of time will pass, even though it's just ongoing. And it's being maintained by God, maintaining a perpetual afterlife, not an infinite amount of afterlife. There's a difference between that. Think about it. Difference. The second point you said is, I think I forgot the second. Yeah, I got the first point and you remind me the second point. What motivated God to make the universe? Or was there an internal motivation inside him? You're assuming that God requires internal motivation like humans do, like creatures do. His will is actually the only true free will, because we make choices based on internal motivations we don't have a choice over. We just pick to follow them or not. Whereas God literally initiates from nothing, as in nothing motivates him. He doesn't have an internal nature that pushes him to do it, like an internal mechanism. Remember I mentioned that? He initiates it because he wills it. Simple. We can't understand it because we only look at motivation by finite creatures, how they are motivated. But God doesn't need it. That's the point. He creates from nothing, and he wills. His will is he wills to create from nothing in a way. Nothing precedes him or makes him want to do it. Understand? And your second point, which I've now forgotten, remind me.
What was He doing before He created us? Because He's limitless. So He's always existed.
Yes.
So before He created the universe, what was He doing then?
Okay, so before he created the universe, what was he doing? I assume there's a presumption in this that God was in like an infinite series of time waiting, and then suddenly at one point in that decided to make things incorrect. God is outside of time. There was no infinite past to God. God is beyond future and beyond past. If you view time as change, rate of change, God doesn't change, and so there was no prior to God. There's just God, and then He initiates creation, and that's it. But it's hard to grasp because we think, like before the universe being made, God is just like looking at the time and just waiting around, because time is always changing, right? But that's really wrong, because He's outside of time and He doesn't change. So you could say God exists prior to time, and hence there's no infinite past for Him. There's just He exists and then He creates.
Because if you think about time, just a parameter that God created in the universe that runs according to rules and regulations, and God is above those rules and regulations, so He's not controlled by time because it's His creation. So the finite, the infinite, cannot be limited by the finite. Going back to the earlier speech.
Looks like I have a successor to take over after I leave. So yeah, that's good. So anyway, all I will say is thank you for attending, thank you for your patience, thank you for the questions, and please speak to us afterwards to get my slides, and well, thank you, and I'll speak to you soon maybe.